Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. I was a camp counselor and saw something I shouldn't. In the summer of 2014, I worked as a counselor at a sleepaway camp in northern Michigan. It wasn't one of those fancy ones with air-conditioned cabins and daily Instagram updates. This was a dusty, mosquito-infested, middle-of-nowhere kind of camp. Camp Fernmore, hidden behind a wall of pine trees where the sun always seemed to set a little too early. I didn't grow up going there, but my friend did. He convinced me to apply, said it was a nice gig. Free food, easy money, and the best summer of your life. He left out a few things, like the fact that it shut down in the early 90s after a kid went missing, or that it reopened quietly under a new name with new management and a lot fewer campers. I didn't ask questions. I was 19, broke, and needed the paycheck. My job was basic: watch 6 preteens and keep them alive while somehow keeping them entertained. No phones, no cameras, just campfires, hikes, and living in the moment. At first it was fine, boring even, until the night of the full moon, July 11th. I remember because one of the kids, Jamie, wouldn't stop whining about his birthday being ruined by nature. He was right, in a way. That night I woke up to scratching. Not from inside the cabin, from the roof. I thought it was a raccoon, grabbed my flashlight, climbed the rickety back ladder, and aimed the beam across the shingles. Nothing. But the scratching had stopped. When I came back down, one of the kids, Bryce, was missing. The door was wide open. I sprinted into the woods. I don't know what I expected to find, but it wasn't what I did find. Bryce, standing perfectly still in a clearing, shirtless, eyes wide, shaking. And something else, 20 feet behind him, something huge. It was crouched low, like it was sniffing the ground, covered in matted black fur, long limbs, too long, and the sound it made, deep raspy breaths that didn't match any animal I've ever heard. It didn't look real, until it stood up, 7 feet tall, maybe more. I didn't move, neither did Bryce. Then it sniffed the air and turned toward us. I grabbed Bryce, screamed, and ran. I don't think I've ever run like that in my life, not even close. It didn't follow us. The next day, the camp director said Bryce sleepwalked, told me to stop scaring the kids with ghost stories. But here's the part I've never told anyone. Bryce wasn't the same after that. His eyes looked darker, he stopped speaking much, and on the next full moon, August 10th, he disappeared again. They found him 2 days later, naked, covered in blood that wasn't his. His fingernails were gone, or changed. Camp shut down the next week. Knowing its background, it probably opened back up next summer. Logan and I swore not to talk about it. We both moved on, or tried to. If you're thinking about applying to a camp in northern Michigan that doesn't show up on Google Maps, don't. My doorbell camera keeps getting alerts. There's no one there, until I look at the footage. I installed a doorbell camera 2 weeks ago, just a cheap one from Amazon. I figured it'd be good for catching porch pirates, keeping an eye on things when I was away. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happens here, or at least, that's what I used to think. The first alert came at 1:47 a.m. Motion detected at front door. I opened the app, expecting to see a stray cat, maybe a passing car, but the feed was empty. My porch, my driveway, the dim glow of the streetlight. Nothing. Probably a bug triggering the sensor, I thought. I went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. 3:12 a.m. Motion detected at front door. Again I checked. Again the porch was empty, but something felt off. The shadows looked deeper. The streetlight's glow seemed weaker, like it was struggling against something I couldn't see. Then I made a mistake. I checked the saved footage. For just a single frame, there was something. A shape. A tall figure standing perfectly still just beyond the camera's field of view, right at the edge of the street. It wasn't moving. It wasn't walking past. It was watching. I told myself it was a glitch, a trick of the light. I deleted the footage and went back to bed, ignoring the unease curdling in my stomach. The next night, it happened again and again. Every night, 1:47 a.m., 3:12 a.m., 4:56 a.m., always just one frame, and each time the figure was closer. I call the police. They find nothing. After a week of this, I finally called the cops. The officer checked the footage, frowning. "Could be a camera error," he said, "or a prank. We'll patrol the area tonight." He walked around with a flashlight, scanning my yard, even shining it down the street. Nothing. Still, I felt a little safer knowing someone would be keeping an eye out. That night, I actually managed to fall asleep until the next alert came in. 4:03 a.m. Motion detected at front door. I opened the app, dreading what I'd see. This time the figure was standing at the foot of my driveway, and now I could see its face. Or rather, I could see where its face should be. There were features, but they were wrong. Too smooth, too symmetrical, like a mannequin that had almost, but not quite, been shaped into something human. I slammed my phone down, my hands shaking. I called the cops again. They arrived in minutes, checked the area, checked the footage, and found nothing. But then as one officer stepped onto my porch, he hesitated. "Did you touch your doorknob recently?" I frowned. "No," he pointed. The knob was wet, like someone had gripped it, held it, for a long time. I didn't sleep at all that night. It knows I'm watching. The next day, I took off work, stayed inside, blinds closed, kept checking the footage. Nothing happened all day. Then, at exactly midnight, I got another alert. I opened the app. The camera feed was black. Not offline, just black. Like something was covering the lens. My stomach clenched. I grabbed the nearest kitchen knife, stepping slowly toward the front door. Then, a knock. Soft, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, another knock. I checked my phone again. The feed was still black, but the microphone was working. I tapped the audio button and whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, in the quietest voice I have ever heard, "I know you see me." I dropped the phone. My hands were ice cold. My pulse pounded in my ears. For the next 6 hours, I sat on the floor, knife in hand, waiting for the sun to rise. The camera wouldn't turn off. Morning came. I checked the footage again, half expecting to see nothing, half dreading what I might find. At first, everything looked normal. Then I checked the motion log. There was a new timestamp, 3:47 a.m. But instead of saying motion detected at front door, it just said, "Face recognized." My blood turned to ice. I don't have facial recognition enabled. My breath hitched, hands shaking. I tapped the notification, trying to open the image. The app glitched, froze. The screen flickered. Then, just for a split second, it flashed an image. Not of my porch, not of the street, of me, asleep in bed. I threw the phone across the room. Hard hammering, I ran to the front door, yanked the camera off its mount, unplugged it. The app stayed open. The feed stayed live. Even with the camera off, it was still recording. I tried deleting the app. It wouldn't let me. I tried resetting my phone. The app wouldn't close. I tried turning off my Wi-Fi. The feed stayed on. And just now, as I'm typing this, I got another alert. Motion detected. But this time it's not at the front door. This time, it's inside the house. There is a broken incubator in the shed. My wife says I need to go deal with it because it's an eyesore and she's busy with the newborn. So here I am. I've never considered myself much of a fixer. Sure, I do a little woodworking on the side, hence the existence of the shed, but I am more of a builder than a fixer, and I'd never taken on anything with the size, scale, or mechanical complexity of an incubator. At some point, perhaps in a moment of foolhardiness or ego, I decided the most effective course of action would be to take all the parts out and reassemble the incubator from scratch, and of course all the pieces inside became undone and refused to fit back in again. So I've concluded, fixing the incubator is beyond my skill level. The least my wife could done was leave me with an instruction manual or tell me how the hell shed managed to break it to such an extent to begin with, but no. because, to quote her verbatim, fixing is a man's job. So for the past few months it's just been me, stuck in a shed with an increasingly more broken incubator. But it didn't start this way. If one were to believe in fate's design, then the broken incubator began with a single doctor's appointment. June 12, 2023. I sat pensively in the sterile waiting room, my eyes trained on the brown wooden nameplate, Dr. Ann Mead's OBGYN. The best of the best, according to my wife. Impossible problems deserve impossibly good solutions. I nearly jumped out of my skin when the door abruptly swung open. "Please join us." I took a seat next to my wife and cautiously surveyed her face. Her puffy red eyes and tear-streaked foundation told me all I needed to know. The doctor cleared her throat. "So, as I was just telling Maria, unfortunately there is nothing we can do. Medically, it's not, her reproductive system is not." The doctor's eyes flickered between us hesitantly. "Hospitable for childbirth." Inhospitable. I'd heard it countless times before. Your wife's body is inhospitable for growing a fetus. Countless appointments, countless waiting rooms, countless gynecologists later, and the answer was still the same. Inhospitable. There was no explanation, no details, no pathology given to me, thanks to my wife's persistent invocation of HEPA. And yes, of course I respect my wife's privacy, but imagine how frustrating it is, forking over thousands of dollars just to hear the same expert opinion parroted at me again and again. Inhospitable. What a fucking medical mystery. You're really not going to give me IVF or even pills? It's just impossible. My wife's voice was beginning to crack. "Please, we came here for you, for help. My husband, he can afford whatever treatment. He can. Take a break from trying," the doctor advised, her voice flat despite the sympathetic lilt. I wondered how many times she rehearsed a conversation exactly like this one. Perhaps a new hobby, a pet, social interaction can be therapeutic. To my wife, those trivial parting words were sage prescriptions. First came the chickens, then a little garden for the chickens, complete with a pastel pink hutch, and then of course the incubator. "We needed to care for the chickens," my wife insisted. The first time I saw the 1.6-meter tall incubator standing awkwardly in a corner of the shed. Easy for her to say when it was bought on my dime. My wife insisted these new additions to the household would help her manifest a pregnancy. "It's good motherly energy," my wife would say. She thought it was all about the vibe. I thought she was fucking insane. But my wife seemed to thrive with her newfound toys. She would spend hours tending to the chickens, or locked away in the shed with the incubator. Our new housekeeper, Carolina, prescribed for social interactions, would tail my wife around the house, listening to her lengthy rants and helping her with the housework. The two seemed to be peas in a pod. With Carolina around, the mood in the house seemed to be lifted. And then the impossible happened. In October 2023, my wife got pregnant, but so did Carolina. The news of Carolina's pregnancy left me furious initially, as Shed breached her employment contract, but the more I thought about it, the more I found it peculiar. "It doesn't make sense," I said as I confronted them. "She's always at home, and even when she's out with you. How the hell did she get pregnant?" "Immaculate conception," my wife explained, feverishly gesticulating at the Google Translate results on her iPhone. "Ta claro, Carolina. Concepso immaculata. Gift. From God. All the feminine energy in the house has impregnated us both. Double the children. Oh, it's a double miracle." My wife refused to acknowledge any of my negativity. She seemed to truly believe that our Brazilian housekeeper was some sort of divine feminine talisman delivered personally to her by God himself. So overwhelming was her feminine prowess that it had impregnated both her and my wife. From that day, it was all about Carolina. If my wife and her seemed close at first, they were now literally inseparable. Wherever my wife went, Carolina was no more than 2 steps behind. 2 pregnancies, 2 bellies, 2 sets of footsteps echoing down the halls. They went to birthing classes together, hired the same midwife, went to the same OBGYN, bought matching baby supplies. All activities I was now excluded from. Appointments, meetings, or classes seemed to get scheduled at the worst times, on my busiest work weeks, or when I was on work trips. And those appointments I could make it to. Well, they get serendipitously canceled last minute and rescheduled to some other day I couldn't make it for. It was like I was being replaced in my own marriage. After months of being treated like an outsider, I finally cracked. We were almost at the 9-month mark, and I hadn't been to a single doctor's appointment with my wife. All I wanted was to make sure my wife and baby were safe. Surely that's not unreasonable. So, on my lunch break, I gave my wife's doctor a ring and blurted out a series of questions about the baby, when my wife's due date was, how the appointments had been going, what could I do to prepare for the baby's arrival. I paused to take a breath. There was silence on the line. The doctor breathed in deeply. Are you sure she's pregnant? Yeah, of course, she's been like that for months. Wait, haven't you been seeing her? She's been going to you for checkups. No? I fumbled over my words, confused. Another pause on the line. I shouldn't be saying this, but I believe there's cause to be concerned for her safety. What? Is she okay? Will the baby be okay? Maria can't have a baby. She had a radical hysterectomy 15 years ago. I took the journey home in silence, foot jammed on the accelerator, and my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. I swerved into the driveway and stumbled out of the car, then stopped short. There she was, my wife, standing serenely on the front porch, rocking a little white bundle in her arms. She was draped in white. The post-birth clothes shed shone me, a haunting, calm visage. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something felt off. You're early. It's here. I struggled to catch my breath. She gazed lovingly at the baby in her arms. Adorable, isn't he? But how is this possible? You're not. You can't. You really shouldn't go around calling people and spreading lies. Left me quite the mess to clean up. She finally looked up from rocking the baby, her steely gaze now bearing into my soul. He's got your eyes, you know. I don't understand. That's not my kid. You can't get pregnant. She rolls her eyes. Sure, I can't. As it turns out though, there's a lot a turkey bastard can do. Surely you don't actually believe the immaculate conception bullshit I spun. Carolina, I breathed, with sudden clarity. That's what was missing. My wife paused mid-rock. Where's Carolina? Ever since the double pregnancy, Carolina hadn't left my wife's side for a second. She was her companion, lapdog shadow. The space around my wife seemed so uncharacteristically empty. My wife pressed her lips together in a smirk. In the back. I took off sprinting around the side of the house towards the backyard, white-hot panic seizing in my brain. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I frantically glanced around the yard. The grass had seen a recent disturbance. Entire patches were matted. Fresh claw marks marred the earth. You could almost trace the paths of footprints across the yard, heavy and stumbling. Almost see where someone might fallen, wrestled, rolled around, where they dug in their heels, where they tried to crawl away. From somewhere in the distance came the muffled hum of vinyl on the old Victrola record player. But then I know it's growing strong. The trees and shrubs hung limp and still, with a slickness, a wetness, a weight that wasn't there before. Who'd have believed you'd come along? The wicked summer heat rolled beads of sweat down my back. Hands. The air hung thick with humidity and a sickly sweet metallic scent. Touching hands. It wasn't dew nor the typical stickiness of summertime. No. The smell, the music, they were coming from. Reaching out. The shed. Touching me. Touching you. The music hit its crescendo as I flung the shed doors open. My eyes glazed over for a second. All I saw was red. Blood, fresh, and sticky and sopping, spattered on the ceiling, on the windows, on the walls, soaked into the wooden frame, trickling out of the shed and onto the grass. On the work table lay blood-stained tools, a box cutter, a circular saw, a kitchen knife, a hammer, a clamp. Along the serrated edge of the saw there were still visible clumps of tissue and flesh, but most of the flesh, flaps of skin and unrecognizable hacked-off bits of innards, lay on the floor, swimming in pools of blood, mystery meat and cranberry sauce. And in the corner of the shed, propped against a wall, is a crumpled mess of a body and clumps of matted dark brown hair sticking out from under a wooden plank. Carolina's in the same corner of the shed as on the first day I met her, just that this time, there's a lot less of her in her. I want to scream, but nothing comes out. Labor was hard on her. My wife appeared behind me. Her organs are on the fucking floor, Maria. I hissed, that's not labor. Well, my wife smiled brightly. I don't see a problem with that. What the fuck is wrong with you? People are going to ask about her. The agency. The neighbors. Where's your housekeeper? What happened to Carolina? How are we going to answer them? I started to panic as the full weight of reality began to dawn on me. My wife cocked her head to the side, eyes wide with feigned innocence. What housekeeper? I don't remember a housekeeper. See? It's easy. Oh my God, I mumbled, resisting the urge to puke. There's so much blood. We can just leave her here. She served her purpose. My wife sighed and shrugged nonchalantly, and I did the hard part. You didn't do shit, so now you can clean up the mess. Oh great, all this just for a kid, I spat. Our kid, Clyde, our kid. And I'd appreciate if you didn't curse in front of Georgie. Maria flipped on her heels and strode back into the house. I turned back to Carolina. The record player crackled and popped. Sweet Caroline. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The body twitched slightly. I believe they never could. Fucking rigor mortis. I vomited all over the shed floor. There's a funny thing that happens when things unravel. Try as you might to slide it all back in place. It never quite fits the same way it used to. Maybe that's why people rarely opt to reassemble dead bodies for disposal. So I don't know why I keep trying. The cleaning was the easy part, but long after all the blood had washed off the walls and all the scattered debris had been collected, it still lies there. On its side, fully ajar, sitting in the freezer box in the shed. It is missing some pieces, but has far too many to stuff back into its shell. I try and I try, but the pieces seem to have a life of their own. They only seem to multiply and expand with time and just refuse to fucking fit back in. I feel like I'm losing my mind. My wife says if we don't call the problem by its name, it'll go away. So, with that in mind, is anyone in the market for a broken incubator? I work security at a mountain town aquarium. There's a man in a lab coat changing the fish. The mere idea of an aquarium in Poprad is a cruel joke. Slovakia has no access to the sea. Poprad is a mountain town of 50,000 that has zero reason or desire for anything fish-related. The aquarium should not exist, yet it does. I have always been confused by its existence, but when I saw a posting for a night watchman job, I didn't hesitate. It was in a quiet part of town, seemed like easy money. The only expensive thing in the aquarium was its prize attraction, Janoshik, the giant octopus. The many-limbed creature must have cost a fortune, and transporting it to Central Europe could not have been easy. Yet the money spent on Janoshik would have not been of any interest to the local hooligans or drug addicts that might try to break in during the night. Janoshik didn't have a care in the world. He would just float around the central tank of the aquarium, occasionally snacking on one of the squids that were imported for him. All around the mammoth sea creature sat exhibits of freshwater fish native to the area: carp, catfish, eels, trout. The selection of the other exhibits didn't differ much from the frozen food aisle. If Janoshik was an avocado, he was surrounded by a field of potatoes. The crux of my job was showing up to the aquarium an hour before closing time, ushering what few visitors there were, and then patrolling the grounds until the place opened back up in the morning. For months, I was just content picking up a paycheck for hanging out with an octopus, but then one day everything changed. My boss, Mr. Kufa, was an alcoholic who long ago gave up on trying to hide the fact. The liquor kept him occupied and he barely spoke to me, yet that particular morning he screamed. He had called me up on the morning of a day off and insisted that I show up at work immediately. Mr. Kufa had heard I spoke English. I was needed to translate. The owner of the aquarium had shown up. Henry Willow was an American scientist. He had paid for the aquarium to be constructed 5 years prior, and a family friend secured Mr. Kufa the job of managing it. Aside from bringing in the giant octopus and paying for its exotic live feed, he never interfered with business. That was until he decided to visit that afternoon. He had finely trimmed facial hair and wore a strange garb that seemed to be a marriage between a lab coat and a suit. Willow wasn't alone. With him he had two enormous men with shaved heads and dull eyes. Finding Mr. Kufa half a bottle deep into his workday was an unpleasant surprise for Henry Willow. The fact that the drunk manager couldn't communicate with him proved to be a much bigger inconvenience. Willow did not hide his annoyance. When I entered the room, he was screaming and looked like he was about to slap my boss with his notebook. Luckily, the muscle he had brought along didn't share his anger. The two giant men just stared off into the ether as their boss ranted and raved. I had learned most of my English from watching shows, and I've never had much time to practice, but eventually I managed to start translating. As his points started to get across, Willow calmed. He even managed a laugh or two by the time his orders were delivered. Mr. Kufa wasn't smiling. As I told him what Henry Willow wanted, all the drunkenness drained from his eyes and was replaced by fear. The fish in the exhibits were to be replaced over the following weeks. Willow's men would take care of the entire affair, and all they needed was a place to dispose of the old fish. Eventually, everything in the aquarium would be replaced. Everything at the aquarium would be new. There were liabilities and laws to consider, but it wasn't until the question of Janoschik had been brought up that Mr. Kufa's face tipped from confusion to fear. Of course, we'll replace him. Willow exclaimed with sudden force and joy. Octopuses are a thing of the past. It's time we made room for new animals. The man's speech had shifted from a calm explanation to a sudden burst of energy. Even one of the giants that stood behind Willow seemed to be momentarily brought out of his trance to flinch. The aquarium potentially losing its only source of visitors might have been an unpleasant thought, but it was the realization that he was dealing with a madman that drained the blood from his face. So Mr. Kufa started to stutter out questions that Henry Willow had no interest in answering. With a deep breath, the scientist spoke directly to me. With his voice slowly descending back to calmness, Henry Willow explained that the aquarium was to be left empty on the nights of the replacements. All security systems were to be shut off to keep things simple. None of the signage outside of the exhibits was to be removed. If any of the visitors inquired about any changes to the fish, management was to deny everything. A healthy bonus would be issued for discretion. Henry Willow handed me a list of dates scrawled in pencil on children's stationery. Telling me to explain everything to my boss, the scientist got up and left. For a moment the giant stood by his chair, staring blankly at the wall, but eventually they left too. My boss was in complete disbelief about what we were being asked to do, but eventually he took the paper and told me to leave him be. The man I left in that office was filled with despair, but by my next shift, Mr. Kufa seemed in more stable spirits. He was even uncharacteristically sober. He informed me that the aquarium would be following Willow's wishes and that I would get a bonus of €200 a month for keeping my mouth shut. I didn't ask him how much of the discretion bonus the €200 were. I was just happy for the $200. When the first replacement date came about 2 weeks later, I enjoyed my night off and didn't think much of it. When I first got into the aquarium on the following day, nothing seemed to have changed. The fish looked just about the same, the exhibits remained unaltered, and nothing in the aquarium seemed amiss. It wasn't until the lights dimmed, and I started my patrol that I noticed something off. The school of fish in the minnow exhibit. They still looked like something you could get in a bait shop, but with the lights of the aquarium turned down, I could see that they were glowing. The light emanating from their little bodies was dim and took concentration to see, but it was undeniable. Henry Willow had made the minnows glow. The new exhibit consumed most of my attention that first night, but over the following days the appeal of the glowing fish faded. The changes that were made to the fish would always be something small. The carp would shoot little bursts of water against the glass. The whiskers of the catfish would move as if they had a life of their own. The eels would swim just a little faster. I'd find it interesting on first sight, but as the changes lost their novelty, I would return back to spending my nights watching Janoschik sluggishly swim around his tank. Sure, I did wonder about what it was that Willow was doing to the fish, but I didn't worry too much about it. It wasn't any of my business. The €200 kept my mind at ease. I didn't worry about Henry Willow's replacements until, one night I found Janoschik's tank filled with darkness. In his central tank, the giant octopus didn't have any reason to worry. His home was roomy, filled with plenty of live feed with no predators to fear. I had never seen Janoschik ink. After the final replacement night, however, the inside of his tank was murky with dark defensive clouds. Janoschik had seemingly changed overnight as well. I could still recognize the same giant octopus, but instead of swimming around at his own pace, he kept on following me as I walked by the tank. What made matters so much stranger was that he wasn't alone. Janoschik was surrounded by the little squids and fish he used to eat. No emotion could be read from behind his slitted inhuman eyes, but I could tell that the octopus was scared. As were all the other creatures flanking his nervous form, off in the cloudy dark, I could see something shift. Fearing that there might be something wrong with the filtration system, I gave Mr. Kufa a call. It took him a while to pick it up, but when he did, he had no interest in hearing about the filtration system. I wasn't being paid to investigate the safety of the tanks. I was just meant to make sure no junkies break into the aquarium. Within a couple slurred sentences, I could hear that he was already drunk. Not wanting to fight a losing battle, I apologized and hung up. I had hoped that maybe the tank would clear out on the following night, but it didn't. When I returned back to work, Janoschik looked much worse than he did the night before. His large orange body was covered in dark brown bruises, and some of the suckers on one of his tentacles seemed to be missing. The crowd of prey that had sheltered around the octopus had also grown considerably smaller. There was something else in the tank. It wasn't a fish or a squid or an octopus. From beyond the smoky ink, I could see its silhouette. It had arms. It had legs. The creature was far too small to be a person, but it was humanoid in nature. I did my best to not look too closely at Janoshik and busied myself with patrolling other parts of the aquarium. With a dull thud, however, the central tank called to me. It all happened in an instant. From the dark waters came a claw, a monkey-like claw that tried to grasp at the head of the octopus. As Janoshik fought off the intruder, the claw switched its target. With hooked talons, the monkey grasped one of the squids that was sheltering by the octopus and fled back into the dark waters. I called Mr. Kufa once more. The filtration in the tank being faulty was one thing, but Janoshik seemed to be in imminent danger from whatever had been put in his tank. My boss took ages to pick up, and when he did, he was furious that I was interrupting him while he was at home. When I detailed the reason for my interruption, he told me to not patrol the central section of the aquarium anymore. Whatever was happening in the tank was happening with the blessings of Henry Willow. And give me 400 euros at the end of the month if I promised to keep it to myself. Without giving me a chance to respond, Mr. Kufa hung up on me. When he clicked off his phone, however, the call did not end. For a couple seconds, my phone was still lit up. On the other end of the call, I could hear the phone rustle. It was only after a couple seconds of this rustling that the phone actually went dark. Someone was listening in on our conversation. Memories of Willow's towering bodyguards quickly filled my mind. I had spent months in silent friendship with the octopus, yet I retreated to the exhibits in the back of the aquarium. I didn't want to see Janoshik get hurt, but I was much more concerned about my own safety. Spending time around the glowing minnows or the goofy catfish didn't calm me. Where months ago the creatures seemed like innocent curiosities, they were now demented steps towards the violent beast in the main tank. When I finally left the aquarium at the end of my shift, I considered never returning. I considered calling Mr. Kufa, telling him a family emergency had come up and that I would not be able to work for at least a month. I even took out my phone to start my retreat, yet I never dialed his number. At the moment, I convinced myself it was because the extra money was good and the job was easy and that if I kept to myself, everything would be fine. Now, however, I know that was a lie. I didn't call Mr. Kufa that morning because I was scared someone else might be listening in on the call. When I came in on the following shift, Mr. Kufa had already left the office. Only the grumpy ticket lady remained. When I asked if anyone had complained about Janoshik, she shrugged. It had been a slow day. If anyone had words for her, she wasn't listening. When I asked her if she had seen the central tank herself, the ticket lady proudly told me that she had no interest in fish and that she hadn't moved past the ticket office in 6 months. I tried to let some of the old woman's disdain for her job rub off on me. For around 30 minutes, I found myself content looking at the strange carp and colorful minnows, but eventually my fondness for Janoshik got the better of me. I entered the main hall. The water was clear. For a moment I was relieved. I thought that maybe Mr. Kufa had taken my qualms to heart and had the filtration system fixed. Yet quickly, the clearness of the water proved to be a terrible omen. What I saw in the central tank chilled me to my very core. Janoshik was dead. Floating in the middle of his tank, the giant octopus had been robbed of most of his tentacles. The few bits of appendage that remained were bruised and cut with terrible violence. The sight of the familiar animal brutalized made me uneasy, yet it was only a fraction of the terror I was witnessing. What was worse, what was so much worse, was the sight of the creature that had delivered such violence onto the giant octopus. The beast was shaped like a chimpanzee, yet it had the face of a fish. The moss-like fur that covered its body shined with a luminescence of dazzling shifting colors. With its savage claws, the creature ripped at Janoshik. With teeth as sharp as knives, the beast ate the octopus flesh. The sheer terror of what I was witnessing made my hands numb. I dropped my flashlight. The monstrosity on the other side of the glass seemed to be in the midst of a manic feeding frenzy, yet the crash made its attention singular. Slowly, with an eerie gentleness, the creature swam toward me. Its eyes, a horrid gray mixture of mammal and aquatic life, watched me with curiosity. In its incomprehensible jaw, the thing thoughtfully chewed the dead flesh of my companion. I wanted to retreat. Desperately, I wanted to dull my brain with glowing fish and boring eels. All I wanted to do was to run away from the horrid amalgamation that stared at me from behind the glass, but I could not. A chimpanzee with the face of a fish, glowing all the colors of the rainbow. I was utterly mesmerized. The thing had me in a trance. Suddenly, the abomination snapped open its massive jaw. I stumbled backward, brought back to reality by the sudden movement. Chunks of Jono Sheik's flesh hung in the water, like unanswered questions. Then slowly they started to descend down into the terrible maw of the fish thing. The creature was sucking water. Out of fear, I stumbled a step or two back, yet curiosity kept me still. I wanted to know what the fish monkey was doing. In a terrible thud, the answer came. The beast was pushing a stream of water out of its mouth, just like the replaced carp. The carp, however, only tapped the glass. The beast that swam before me that night sent it crashing down. The fish monkey's neck tore open with massive gills. Like the ventilators of some terrible amphibian machine, the gills sucked in water and strengthened the monstrosity's stream. A spiderweb of crystal broke out across the wall of the central tank. Before I had a chance to run, the glass wall fractured into 1,000 pieces and the world became wet. The wave of water knocked me off my feet, but I quickly regained my balance. The fish monkey's footing was less even. It crawled over the sharp edges of its tank, yet managed to move no further. It struggled in the broken glass, its gills heaving with punished effort. The thing looked as if it was about to die, but then, with muscles shivering beneath the fur of moss, the monstrosity started to rise. It took impotent breaths with its fish mouth. With each inhale, it wheezed in a pained, shrill tone. The creature was struggling, trying to will its biology to perform an act it was not built for, yet with each breath its vocalizations deepened. With each breath, the fish monkey grew stronger. The moment I was reminded of those terrible teeth, I ran. It's behind me. I could hear the beast's darkening grunts, but its footsteps splashed with lack of balance. Their tempo quickly sped up. When I was sure the creature could catch me, I hid in the nearest place I could find, the janitor's closet. I stood in the darkness, shaking, praying for my soul. Out in the hallway, the creature's footfalls splashed. It ran past the door and towards the lobby. I held my breath. I waited for that monstrosity to be completely gone before I moved a muscle. The moment I was sure, the moment I could hold my breath no longer, I reached into my pocket and picked up my phone. I called Mr. Kufa. It was still early in the evening. Mr. Kufa would be drunk, but he would be awake. I begged the universe to bring him to his phone. Yet the dial tone numbed all my hopes. Mr. Kufa was not picking up the phone, past the tonal reminder of his absence. I heard something worse. The wet footsteps had returned. They were heading towards the door. As dial tone dragged on, I could hear the fish monkey's gasps once more. They were of a dark tenor now. They sounded like grunts. Yet as the creature's face descended towards the door, its wheezes grew shrill once more. The creature huffed at the crack of the door. Even though the thing had no nose, it was trying to smell what was inside of the janitor's closet. I stood as far back as I could. I pressed down on the nearest air refreshener, yet I could not mask my presence. The creature's head retracted and its grunts grew violent again. With a terrible thud, the door shook. The horrid amalgamation of life outside started to roar. "What seems to be the problem?" a voice said, in crisp English, from the other side of the line. "Mr. Willow?" "That is Professor Willow," the madman said, his voice calm as ice. "What seems to be the problem?" "The thing. It escaped." The beast's assault against the door continued. It roared with absolute animalistic fury. "What thing?" Willow asked, no doubt hearing the terror but speaking no less calmly for it. "Be more specific, please." "The thing from the central tank." "Oh." The wood of the door snapped, and a terrible glowing claw reached out into the tight space. There was a hint of joy in Henry Willow's voice. "If you had to give it a name, what would you call it?" "What?" I screamed, as the terrible creature started to force its shining body through the door. "What the hell do you mean?" "A name." Willow's tone had broken. He was yelling. "If you had to name the creature, what would you name it?" "Monkeyfish." I screamed. "Please, just send help." Just as the terrible thing was about to grasp me, a piercing tone rose through the air. It made me clutch at my ears, yet it caused the creature no pain. Instead, the terrible amalgamation cocked its horrid head to the side in curiosity. Slowly it backed out of the hole in the door it had created for itself. Descending on all fours, the creature ran off into the hallway. Past the horrid sound, I could hear glass crash out in the lobby. Slowly the tone subsided. My ears were still ringing from the shrill sound, but from the phone I could hear a labored sigh. "A poor choice of name," Henry Willow said, with disdain. "Go home. The aquarium is to undergo repairs." Return back for your evening shift tomorrow. Sleep well. Think of a better name. Do not be late." With that, he hung up. I was beyond shaken from the experience, and I desperately wanted to be in the safety of my own home, yet the terror refused to leave me. I stood leaned up against the edge of the janitorial closet, shaking and broken. For minutes I cowered until I could will my body to move. I found the glass entrance of the lobby shattered. Not 5 meters from the entrance to the aquarium, a manhole cover lay strewn aside. The darkness of the Poprad sewers was dizzying to walk by. On the far side of the parking lot stood a black van. By it towered 2 familiar, identical men. One of them raised his finger to his ear. My phone rang. A blocked number. "Henry Willow speaking," he said. "Calling to confirm that you will show up for your shift tomorrow and not impede any progress that has been made." I did not hesitate to say yes. The 2 giants were staring straight at me. I had come far too close to death that night to take the risk of crossing Henry Willow. "Splendid," the mad scientist said, and hung up. As he did, the 2 men climbed into their van and started the engine. Not wanting to be followed, I fled the parking lot and ducked into the dark park nearby. The last thing I wanted was for Henry Willow or his men to know where I lived. As I made my way back home, I avoided all major roads and kept my eye out for the van. Even though I ran most of the way, the journey to my apartment took much longer than usual. By the time I arrived home and calmed down enough to sleep, however, I considered myself safe. When morning came, that safety proved to be an illusion. The van was waiting outside of my apartment. The 2 giants stood guard, looking directly at my window. Henry Willow's men were far too big, and my front door was far too flimsy to resist. Briefly, I considered calling in sick to work, but I knew they would retrieve me if I wouldn't go on my own. When I arrived at the aquarium, Mr. Kufa was waiting for me at the lobby. I had seen the man drunk countless times before, but never like this. The man was soaked in sweat and could barely string a sentence together. Against his better judgment, he watched the security camera footage from the night prior. My boss wanted out. What's worse, he wanted me to take his place. He wanted me to be the one to deal with Henry Willow. The money. Mr. Kufa kept on focusing on the money. The measly couple €100 that he offered me to keep my mouth shut was only a fraction of Willow's discretion fund. There were tens of thousands being sent over each month. I could have all of it. I could even have Kufa's entire paycheck. All I needed to do was to take on the responsibility of dealing with the mad scientist. No matter how much I resisted, Mr. Kufa kept insisting. It wasn't until I said I would complain about him to Henry Willow that he finally closed his mouth. For a moment, a strong enough gust of fear washed through the man where I feared I was witnessing a heart attack, but eventually he staggered off without another word. That shift, just like the night prior, I avoided the main hall of the aquarium. For about 30 minutes I stared at the innocently aberrant fish in the side tanks. I would have spent the whole night avoiding the location of last night's horror, were it possible. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, with repetition and increased volume. However, the sound became unavoidable. Someone was clearing their throat in the main hall of the aquarium. Knowing that there was no avoiding the interloper, I ventured out to the place which I feared most. Everything in the main hall had been repaired. The mess of broken glass and seaweed had been cleared, and the main tank, although empty, was whole once more. In front of the empty aquarium, flanked by his giant henchmen, sat Henry Willow. "Have you thought more about the name?" he asked, with chilling casualness. It took me a moment to find my words, but when I did, he did not like my response. "No," I told him. "I have not thought about the name of the horrid abomination I had seen the night prior. Fish monkey simply does not roll off the tongue. It's far too pedestrian for a creature so important. How about Aquabe?" Not knowing what else to say to the madman, I agreed. Aquabe did sound like a better name. Willow took my response in good stride. He asked me to sit down with him by the aquarium. He had more questions. His line of inquiry was completely unhinged, yet he asked it with complete calm. Henry Willow wanted to know if I found the monstrosity last night cute and whether I could consider it a friend if it were to defend me in battle. The last thing I wanted to do was to continue conversing with the man, yet the dumb gazes of his massive guards kept me talking. They also kept me honest. I feared that it was all a test, that if I was to tell him I found the horrid amalgamation of biology to be friendly, he would label me a liar and have me disposed of. I told Willow that I feared the creature, that I was certain it would murder me were it given the chance. My responses were honest, yet they did not please Henry Willow. As I spoke, he scribbled angry notes in a flimsy paper notebook he had on his lap. At some point, as I regurgitated the horror I had witnessed last night, he had finally had enough. I did exactly as my dreams have told me. I established this aquarium. I have developed a hybrid genome to near perfection, yet still, your responses displease me. He took a long pause, tapped his pen on the notebook, and then finally closed it. Perhaps you're not meant to survive the final century. Perhaps your kind simply cannot understand. When the dust settles and the smoke clears, the new generation will embrace the aquape and the rest of the hybrids. That must be it. He looked at me for reassurance. Not knowing what else to do, I nodded my head. Willow's questions that night made me deeply uncomfortable, yet it wasn't until his parting words that I truly tasted terror. Henry Willow told me he did not trust Mr. Kuffa. The man was a dullard and an alcoholic. There was no reason to replace him just yet, but were something to happen to my boss, I would become the new manager of the aquarium. It was not a question. It was not a job offer. It was a statement. As Henry Willow and his massive bodyguards left the aquarium, I couldn't help but think of how sick Mr. Kuffa looked last time I saw him. The sleeping people of Los Azules. I was an unusual medical student back in Guadalajara. I wasn't the best, and I wasn't the brightest, but I was diligent. I completed everything as if I just had one shot, and I didn't take anything for granted. I really impressed one of my professors with my work ethic. So much so that I got a personal recommendation to work as an assistant for a Dr. Soto. This was years ago. Kinda strange to look back at it like this. Soto was in her early 50s when we first started to work together. She was a grandmother with a tough-as-nails kind of attitude, and I never once heard her come up with an excuse or back away from a challenge. She would either attack a problem until there was no other angle to face, or she would back away and realize someone else had a better shot at it. She was never afraid to put pride aside when it came to finding a solution. If someone knew better than her, she'd recognize it and step aside. So while Dr. Soto is still in the game, you know there is something yet to be done. I followed Dr. Soto out of the university and into the workspace. When she was headhunted by the INDRI Instituto de Diagnóstico y Referencia Epidemiológicos, she brought me along. She needed someone who could match her diligence, and we'd worked together long enough to understand one another on a personal level. During the first stages of the COVID pandemic, we worked with testing prevention techniques. She also consulted on a panel relating to spread reduction in relation to incubation. There's been a large demand for people in our line of work ever since. While I'm not an epidemiologist, I've worked with plenty, Dr. Soto being the most recognized. And as with everywhere else, experience takes precedence over academics, even in a field like this. While I'll never replace a specialist, I still carry some weight around. So when Dr. Soto was called in on short notice, she brought me along. It was September, not too long ago. I got a text message just after midnight, urging me to get ready to leave first thing in the morning. It was, in no uncertain terms, an emergency, possibly a life or death scenario. Soto texted me that she was pulled in at the last minute with no preparation. "They're getting everyone," she wrote. "It's a national level response." A van pulled up at 3 in the morning. 2 armed men knocked on my door, demanded my identification, and escorted me out of the building. I relaxed a little when they apologized about the indiscretion, but I couldn't help but to be a bit rattled. I was taken to an airport, driven straight through security, and escorted onto a plane. Before entering, they took away my cell phone and laptop. There were about 24 other people there, some which I recognized from past lectures and conferences. These were experts and professionals, far above my level. The flight left for Durango at 5 a.m. When we landed, we were ushered onto a bus with little to no fanfare. There were no answers to my questions, or anyone else's for that matter. We were just told that it was a medical emergency and that we all needed to get on site. And just talking amongst ourselves, we figured a couple of things out. People were being called in from all over. There was me and Dr. Soto from INDRI, but there were people from the Secretariat of Health, Secretariat de Salud, Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risks, SOFEPRIS, the Mexican Social Security Institute, IMS, the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, the Civil Defense Protección Civil, and the Secretariat of Environment and Natural Resources, SEMARNAT. Some were called in to help coordinate response groups, while others were there as experts in their field or as consultants. What was common among us all was our experience in dealing with large-scale containment and quarantine procedures. We went to a small community in the eastern Durango region called Los Azules. This was a rural community that usually had no more than 200 to 300 inhabitants. Most people who lived there alternated between seasonal work in the countryside and more regular work in the big cities, meaning the people living there shifted every 6 months or so. The September rains usually marked the beginning of the off-season, and from what I could glean, this meant that there would be, at most, around 100 people there. Los Azules is in a somewhat arid environment. Not entirely desert, but with infrequent rains. A flat open space with little to no connection to the modern grid. Considering how close it was to the Zona de Silencio, there was a spotty connection, making people rely on antiquated landlines. When we arrived as Los Azules, there were hundreds of people present. Military checkpoints, field hospitals, logistic tents. A nearby field had been flattened into a parking space. This was in the middle of nowhere, making everything stand out like a sore thumb. The temporary setup around the village was almost as big as the village itself. We moved past the checkpoints. Armed guards checked the perimeter, reporting every couple of minutes or so. No one was getting in or out, but no one was going close to the village either. Stepping off the bus, I was immediately taken aside by Dr. Soto. I could tell she was stressed. Her graying hair was a mess, and she had already taken off her jewelry. That meant she was ready to get her hands dirty. I threw a barrage of questions at her, but she could barely hear me over the angry chatter of the other academics. Everyone was upset, but it was hard to tell about what. I caught a couple of stray comments as I was dragged through the makeshift camp, ending up outside a yellow quarantine tent. Soto tapped my chest, pointing to the equipment. "Suit," she said. "We're going in now." Equipment checks, procedure walkthrough, decontamination, airlock. We rushed through it. Then there was a moment of silence, a little peace, as just the two of us stepped through the yellow tent. "We count 63 people," Soto said. "All non-responsive." "Unconscious?" I asked. "Do we know the timeline?" Antibacterial lamps rotated with a sharp hum. I was having trouble adjusting to the suit. It was a bit too large. "About 36 hours, she answered. "No airborne toxins. We're testing for bacterial infection, possibly a virus." "Any symptoms?" She shrugged a little, shaking her head. "Maybe paranoia." We followed a dirt path up towards the main buildings. About 24 in total. I could see other people in hazmat suits walking around with testing kits. One of them was wielding a chainsaw, and I could hear someone using one further in. "Some houses are barricaded," Soto explained. "They're still trying to get in." "How many people are unaffected? Do we have any witnesses?" "No witnesses," she continued. "Everyone's affected." "All of them?" "A couple of people were being rolled out on stretchers. I couldn't see any body bags, so at least there were no casualties." Whatever this was, it had a 100% infection rate. It spread through the whole community, and every single person had fallen unconscious. As we started preliminary testing, Soto took a moment to update me. It started with a call from a worried relative. Local police had initiated a wellness check, only to notice the many boarded-up houses. As an ambulance was called in, it was decided to elevate the issue further. Once it was revealed that it wasn't an isolated incident, it was deemed necessary to quarantine the village. A response team was formed from various government agencies, coordinated by a single director and a panel of experts, one of which was Dr. Soto. Nothing could be excluded at that point. The cause could have been anything. Doctors were going house to house, breaking open doors and windows with crowbars and chainsaws. Terrified dogs were put into cages by an animal control team. They'd be tested too. One by one, people were rolled out of their homes and taken to the yellow quarantine tents. Soto and I moved one ourselves. A young man, maybe 17 years old. He was just sitting on the couch, completely unresponsive, holding a stress ball. The tents were filling up. The director had ordered a complete checkup, looking for either a virus or bacteria. If we could eliminate the possibility of an airborne cause, we could relax our security protocols. Soto and I ran tests on the young man. There were no signs of unusual bacteria or a virus. We did notice a heightened level of ketones and stress hormones, mainly epinephrine and cortisol, but that didn't tell us much. Soto and I used what little time we had without even thinking of a break, as we were supposed to present our findings to the director later that evening. After hours of testing and running into wall after wall after wall, Soto and I were staring blankly at an almost empty whiteboard, with only a couple of words hastily scribbled in the corner. Cortisol, ketones, epinephrine. "It's not a coma," she said. "And it's not sleep either." "You don't get stressed by sleeping," I agreed. but the ketone levels are similar to that of a coma patient. At a glance perhaps, but not in context. She sighed. We're missing something. We were given a government laptop. There was a remote meeting set up with the expert panel and the director. Everyone was to share their working theories. I wasn't originally meant to be in the room, but Dr. Soto needed me to stay informed, so she allowed me to stay just outside the camera. There were a lot of discussions, mostly about what we could and couldn't rule out. We'd found no evidence of a viral or bacterial infection. One team had checked for fungus. One by one, they were all saying the same thing. These people were unresponsive, and there was no clear indication as to why. They were being given saline solutions and treated as coma patients for the time being, but the cause was still unclear. One expert suggested that it was a toxin-induced coma. They'd found trace remains of a cyanobacterial poison in the groundwater, indicating that there might have been a larger than usual algal blooming in the area. Dr. Soto refuted this, saying that the levels were far too low to put a person into a coma. The director argued that what we were measuring might be the aftermath, meaning we were seeing the trace remains rather than the initial dose. This was the official working theory we were going for, but I could tell it wasn't it. Dr. Soto wasn't giving up. There had to be something else. While our main objective was shifting towards antibacterial treatment, Dr. Soto wasn't convinced. We decided to look closer at environmental factors in the patient's home. While Dr. Soto was under close watch and had regular sign-ins every 2 hours, I didn't have that kind of restriction. I could come and go without anyone paying much attention. I brought a notebook and returned to the village. All windows and doors were barricaded from the inside. They'd had to cut the door open with a chainsaw. There was plenty of food in the fridge, and not a lot of trash, showing that the patient hadn't been locked up for long before they lost consciousness. A day at most. There were a lot of things around the community that didn't make a lot of sense. Some people were found holding crucifixes. Others were looking at pictures of their family or past relatives. They gave their pets food and water, had a big meal, and hunkered down. One of the other teams found a notebook with a bunch of scribbles, but it was taken away before I could get a look at it. Most people were found in their beds. Others had been found hiding in closets or cellars. In one of the houses, someone had sprayed the word Abandonar across the bedroom wall. It almost seemed religious in context, as if they were preparing for the rapture. They were holding what meant dear to them, feeding their pets, and making peace with their God. What else could cause someone to behave like that? As we came upon the evening of the first day, people were exhausted. The medical team was working around the clock, while the security personnel were on rotation. While waiting for some tests to come back, I caught Dr. Soto nodding in and out of a brief sleep as she studied our patient. He looked so peaceful in a way, like none of this concerned him. When Soto noticed I was looking, she snapped to attention and pretended like it was nothing. Spinal fluid, she mumbled. Did you run the, She trailed off and shook her head. I rolled my eyes. No, but you did, I answered. Get some sleep. I can't, she admitted. It feels wrong. You need to be your best, I insisted. They deserve that. No, I mean, it really feels wrong, she explained. Look at him. Did he think he'd end up on our table when he went to sleep? That's what we're trying to figure out, right? She shook her head and retreated to the back of the tent. Still wearing her hazmat, she propped up 2 chairs into a makeshift bed. 1 hour, she sighed. Just 1 hour. I didn't notice anything at first. I was focusing on staying awake and checking the test results. It was true what the director had said. There were trace amounts of cyanobacterial poison in the patient's bloodstream, but it was close to nothing. It couldn't explain what was happening. There was no fever, no response at all. It was just like, click, lights out. Then I heard something. Dr. Soto was moving in her sleep. Not much, but enough for me to notice. Little twitches and noises. She had only been asleep for a couple of minutes, but she was already experiencing something uncomfortable. Then again, she was sleeping on 2 chairs. How comfortable could it be? Another couple of minutes passed, and all of a sudden she twitched again. This time violently enough to fall off the chairs. I ran up to her only to see that she was having some kind of mild seizure. I ran over to one of our red emergency call buttons, pressed it, and hurried back. I put her on her side, making sure she had free airways. It was difficult to see with the suit on, but I could hear her breathing. After a couple of seconds, it passed. By the time help arrived, she was awake and fully aware. She excused it with sleep deprivation, stress, and poor diet. No one dared to question it, but she was to report to a nurse in the morning. Soto agreed. As we were left alone with our patient, she turned to me, red-eyed and shivering. She put her hand on my shoulder. "We both know this is no airborne virus," she said, "so I need you to test me." "Don't be irresponsible," I said. "We can't break protocol." "I've never had a seizure in my life," she snapped back. "Never. And what I felt, I don't know. There was something there, like hearing a breath in the dark." "You could just be sleep deprived," I insisted. "You've been up far too long." "I've worked longer hours under greater pressure," she snarled. "I know what I'm about." She pulled off her hazmat suit and stretched out an arm. I just stared at her, dumbfounded. I wiped down her arm and took some blood for testing as she mumbled about stress hormones. The antibacterial treatment we'd been forced to give to the patient wasn't working, and Soto wasn't about to give up without an answer. She could smell it. There had to be another solution, and as always, she was prepared to go the distance to find it, dragging me along, kicking and screaming. "You find anything strange, anything at all, you tell me immediately," she said, putting her suit back on. "The slightest deviation. Understood?" "Yes." She gave me a pitying smile, as if trying to apologize with her eyes. She knew I was just concerned, but she refused to let that be a hindrance. I made the rounds to some of the other teams to see what they'd found. They hadn't noticed that much. A slightly lowered body temperature was the latest discovery. It'd taken some time to notice, as most of the patients had kept themselves under covers or wrapped in blankets as if laying down to sleep, but they did have a slightly lower than average body temperature. One assistant mentioned finding a phone. Apparently they'd gotten access to it, and there were a couple of videos from one of the residents. Nothing we were allowed to see though, but Shed heard about it secondhand. "They talked about hallucinations," she said. "They were worried about something coming from the zone. Magnetic fields, something abnormal. Zona de silencio. The silent zone is infamous for many strange occurrences. Cell phone signals being interrupted and garbled. GPS, satellite connections. Electronics were often said to be at risk in that area. While Los Azules was on the outskirts of the zone, it was still considered to be part of the general area. We hadn't noticed much disturbance though, but this would just add to the already plentiful rumors. That was probably the reason they tried to do this operation without bringing too much attention. They didn't want to turn this public health hazard into an international spectacle. That made sense to me, but I was stuck on the same line of thought as Dr. Soto, that this wasn't a toxin-induced coma. There would have been more indicators. But then again, there wasn't that much else to go on. So after much internal debate, and double-checking that our patient was stable, I decided to decontaminate and get some sleep. There was a tent just outside the quarantine area where non-security personnel were allowed to rest. I was asleep the moment my head hit the pillow, but sleeping barely brought me any rest. I experienced something. It wasn't really a nightmare, but more like a memory. I had this feeling of looking up at the sky, only to see it looking back. It searched for me, and when it found me, it called out. To what, I couldn't tell, but something heard it, and something was waiting to obey. I could feel movement out there, dragging heavy feet through the sand. Something sharp coming out of the night, cutting the dry petals from the strange blue sunflowers growing amongst the weeds. There was this impression of an eye in the sky. It wasn't looking at my body, it wasn't listening for my words. It was hearing something deeper, who I was, what I thought, what I dreamed. And this dream in itself was an expression, something for it to hear. And it was listening with ill intent. I woke up in the showers, gasping for air. One of the other assistants had dragged me there and soaked me with cold water. I'd had a seizure and there was no other help to get. The last few hours had been chaos. A couple of soldiers had fallen into a coma, just like the residents. These people were never even near the quarantine. They patrolled well outside. A secondary quarantine level had been haphazardly established outside, expanding the perimeter further. A whole rotation of personnel were now deemed unsafe and had to stay inside until further notice. I was among them. It was a nightmare, the assistant told me. Some were screaming in their sleep. One of them almost shot their squad leader. 3 people had to be restrained. I think one of them is still locked in the bathroom. They can't get him out. I returned to Soto. I tested her but found only traces of what we'd seen in the patient. Some increased levels of stress hormones, but nothing serious. Still, it showed that she was affected. Maybe I was too. Maybe we all were. But Dr. Soto focused on something completely different. "Why would he lock himself in the bathroom?" she murmured. "That doesn't make sense." "Maybe he tried to hide," I said, "from something." "Is that what they're doing?" she asked. "Is this young man hiding?" "Just waiting for winter to end," I muttered, curled up and waiting for sunshine. Dr. Soto gave me a curious look, then walked over to her whiteboard. She had an idea. She wrote down all the symptoms. Increased ketones, lowered electrolytes, lowered body temperature. Then she wrote down a couple of new things. "Have we tested leptin levels?" she asked. "Yes," I said, rummaging around some paperwork. "It says slightly elevated, but that could be a dietary issue. We need to do a protein electrophoresis test," she said. "Not a total protein test, just check for one thing." She wrote down HIT on the whiteboard and turned to me. I shrugged. This meant nothing to me. "Hibernation induction trigger," she explained. "Check for that, just that." "Hibernation?" I asked. "People don't have that kind of protein." "Then get a veterinarian out here. Test for it. It's there." She was halfway out the door to call this in when she turned back to me a final time. "They're waiting for winter to end, just like you said." While Dr. Soto has had her strange ideas over the years, this was by far the strangest. I was pulled into a call with the director where she explained her idea. There was something environmental that triggered a stress-induced hibernation response, possibly some kind of dormant gene. An outside force was triggering something causing people to go into hibernation as a stress response, a defense. Of course, it was ridiculous. The director instead concluded that it might be an outbreak of something called SOR, or sudden onset rest event. If so, it was highly contagious, and they needed to keep it in check. They'd already called a specialist from their American colleagues who had more expertise with it. But it didn't make sense. This wasn't something that triggered from people falling asleep. This was something that made people fall unconscious to begin with. They were attacking it from the wrong angle. I hated it, but I had to agree with Dr. Soto. They were looking at it all wrong, and the administered treatment would do more wrong than good. Working on the premise that this was an outbreak of SOR, personnel were administered controlled booster doses to keep them awake. Falling asleep would trigger a violent reaction, in theory. I was given a dose too, and so was Dr. Soto. We didn't take it though. If her theory was correct, these people were listening to some kind of long-lost genetic trigger embedded in our bodies, a natural defense to some kind of phenomenon we were yet to encounter. The following night, this was put to practice. Dr. Soto wasn't given an explicit green light to perform her protein test, but she managed to get a hold of a testing kit anyway and did it herself. While she couldn't positively identify a hibernation induction trigger, she did identify the presence of an unknown protein. This was probably what she was looking for, but she couldn't confirm it yet. But she took it as proof. While Dr. Soto was working on a treatment plan, I decided to check in on the other teams. Most of them were doing okay, but some were showing signs of paranoia. One of the doctors had fallen into the same coma as their patient, ending up on a cot next to them. People were starting to panic. The armed guards who'd been affected were made to surrender their weapons, leaving them exposed and helpless. I saw more than one assistant abandoning their hazmat suit on the floor. What was the point when everyone was already infected? There was a lot of tension in the air. No one knew for sure what was happening, but if the director was correct, this would all pass in about 72 hours or so, as long as we stayed awake. It was late evening, and the September rains were gently patting my shoulder. I was passing through the village, watching the abandoned houses. We had gone through all there was to discover and left the doors wide open. It looked like a war zone. I felt something passing through me, a shiver, like a touchless wind. It froze my heart, making me gasp for air. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I heard cries in the distance. Others had felt it too. Lightning. A bolt struck a tree further out into the field with a deafening blast, and in a split second the night lit up like the middle of the day. In that one moment I saw something in the field, something tall with long arms dragging through the sand. I was confused for a second. It felt unreal, like I was still asleep. Maybe I never woke up. Maybe I was in a coma, or hibernating like the rest of them. That made sense. As a medical professional, I look for things that make sense. I don't look to the fields, backing away from shadows in the sand. But now I did. My instinct was to hide. I ran into the first house I could see and shut the door. I huddled up in the bedroom right next to the spray-painted Abandoner. But unlike the text, I wasn't about to give up anytime soon. I keep a low profile and wait. I didn't have to wait for long. I had a plan in mind. I tried to visualize it, but as I did, that icy chill passed through me again. Something akin to a breath or a pulse. Something pushing itself inside my mind, listening to my thoughts. It was reacting to me, feeling me, and looking in my direction. There were footsteps outside. Long, slow footsteps. Something heavy. It brushed against the side of the building, easily ripping off a wood panel. It poked and prodded against the barricaded windows. It sounded like someone thrusting a knife at a wooden board, searching for weakness. There were screams in the distance. One in particular stood out, a man yelling a prayer at the top of his lungs. "I see angels," he cried out. "I see angels, and I see their ways. I recognize you, blessed saints. I recognize and adore you." Those few words were repeated over and over. Recognize and adore, recognize and adore, recognize and adore. Then those words turned into a foul, shrieking scream. Something grabbed the door handle and slowly pulled. I could hear the hinges snap. There was no hesitation, no struggle, effortless. I tried to think of an escape, but trying to visualize it made my stomach turn. It's like my sudden thought made a noise, something that it could hear. Now the footsteps were coming my way. One of the back windows was locked from the inside. I clicked it open and heaved myself through. I came crashing down into the sand, but pushed myself up, gasping for air. It was dark, but I looked back anyway. The window was very high up, but I could still see something moving inside. I could only see its shoulders. It must have been crouching to fit in there to begin with. For a moment, we noticed one another, and when we did, I felt something. It's like there was a tap in my mind, spilling my thoughts out the back of my head. I felt like a frightened animal. Conscious thought was giving way to fear, and I could feel it happening by the heartbeat. My pulse beat faster. My skin felt warm. My mouth turned dry. And as I turned to run, something broke through the wall. I only saw it for a split second. At least 3 heads taller than me, covered from head to toe in solid black. Long, sharp fingers, like bones or claws. It had no facial features, and it made no noise, but it tore through a wall like it was nothing, sending debris and shrapnel flying. It was just a moment, but it felt like minutes. I could feel the texture of the sand under my fingernails. I could feel it sticking to my sweaty palms. The faint smell of dry vegetation stung my nose and colored the back of my tongue. The image of something I couldn't imagine, standing in front of me, burned into my mind. So I ran. I followed a path down to the first quarantine camp. I have a vague memory of seeing others running in my periphery. The man who'd been praying was being dragged away, leaving a bloody trail in the sand. There were torn tents, and I could hear gunfire in the distance. Even then I was barely paying attention. Something was gaining on me. I was prey. I came back to the first quarantine tent with Dr. Soto and her patient. She was unconscious on the floor with an unmarked syringe next to her. It's not like Shed had a seizure and hurt herself. Shed laid down to sleep. She even had a pillow. I tried to wake her, but there was no point. She was in the same state as the patients. Footsteps approached. I tried to think, but every time I did, I felt that icy chill. I was struggling to hold on to a conscious thought, like a slippery fish. Syringe, I thought. Syringe, syringe, syringe. I looked at what Shed prepared. On one side there was modafinil, a sort of stimulant. It could probably give me the kick I needed to run for help, but there was also cortisol, effectively a stress hormone. Shed prepared both. I couldn't think. The footsteps approached. I had to do something. Pick one, but I couldn't make up my mind, and I couldn't think. The lights behind me were blocked out by something moving into the tent. One word came to mind, spray painted on a wall as a last-ditch effort. Maybe they tried to tell me the solution all along. Abandonar. Give up. I tried to consider my options. I knew the logical thing was to get a boost so I could think. That way I could reason. I could make a plan. I could run for help. The frightened animal in me wanted to do this more than anything else. One shot and I might be good to go. And yet I took the cortisol. A quick sting, then silence. Instead of the stressful rush I was expecting, I felt a lull, like the last thought had finally run out of me. There was something in me that gave up, leaving me half-conscious on the floor. I could feel something grabbing my foot, but I didn't care. I'd forgotten that I was even human. My mind was blanking, and all the objects and textures in my sight turned to unrecognizable colors and shapes. I was dissociating. After a moment, it let go of me. It loomed over me like a cloud. I looked past it and up into the open sky where I saw something. Even then and there I recognized it. It was something so primal that it went beyond understanding. It's like I'd known it all along but decided to look past it. But there it was, as basic of a concept as a sphere or a square. An eye in the sky. And it turned away. My world turned from colors to darkness as my eyes opened and closed. I could feel my breathing slow down, my hands going numb. The texture of the floor disappeared, leaving me floating in a weightless nothing, not sleep, but deeper. I dreamt of open fields, of people laying down in deep caves, hoping their dreams wouldn't give them away. People beating thinkers and philosophers, trying to teach their children to be simple. I saw a man burned alive for expressing a thought as terrified people prayed that nothing would hear him. There was something out there, still listening in remote places where people weren't meant to be. And now it was looking for new places. It was expanding, blooming, and the people of Los Azules were the first to feel it in a very, very long time. And then, like the sun sinking below the horizon, my world went cold and dark. I woke up 36 hours later in a field hospital. I'd been administered modafinil. Dr. Soto had argued that this particular neurostimulant would be enough to wake people from their hibernation. Turns out she was right. No need for complicated treatment. One dose was enough. She'd taken cortisol, just like me. The increased hormones were enough to trigger a cascading stress response, just like the people of Los Azules had gone through. It'd been a long shot, but it had rendered us effectively invisible to those things. It was basically a way for us to hit ourselves over the head hard enough to go to a deep sleep, one where we couldn't be seen or heard. Dr. Soto was the first person I saw. She gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Winter's over," she smiled. "Time to get up." That night, a total of 21 people disappeared. They weren't killed, they disappeared. There were a couple of recordings from automated drones showing people being dragged into the dark, kicking and screaming, and they weren't seen again. 2 people died, but these were deemed accidental deaths from crossfire. All 63 people of Los Azules survived, our patient included. The animals were tested and returned to the owners. Sadly, they couldn't go back. The government took ownership of that strip of land, claiming it to be an underground military installation. Of course it isn't. It never was. But the effect lingers, and people who wander can still feel it. There is no way to prevent it, no way to fight it. The best we can hope for is to trust our bodies to, effectively, play dead. There was an outcry from many of my colleagues, but those cries were silenced. Some had their careers threatened. Some were blackmailed. It was clear to both me and Dr. Soto that we had to cooperate, so we did. We went the other way, asking for compensation and mutual understanding. They agreed. We were very generously compensated, and we signed a contract. So I've been quiet about this since it's an enormous discovery waiting to happen, but it can only be studied in this one instance, in these particular circumstances. We have not been able to trigger that same defense mechanism in any other scenario. It needs that specific threat, and we've yet to find it anywhere but in Los Azules. That is, until not too long ago. 2 more instances of sleeping people have been recorded, once in Sonora and once in Zacatecas. We weren't given specific locations. There were indicators that it might have happened in other places as well, some reports going as far north as the southern United States. Ever since, the director has effectively thrown in the towel. You can't contain this. If it happens, it happens. And it looks like it's going to happen a lot more. Our contract has been voided. There might come a time when this hits the news, but for now they're keeping quiet. Sometimes it's a chemical spill, a gas leak, a virus. There's a lot of names to give something like this. It's just people sleeping longer than usual. Doesn't sound too bad. And the people who disappear, well, who can say for sure? No one knows what happens to them. I can't fathom what we're facing, something that's been here as long as we have. Does it hate us or love us? Where do we go? I don't understand, and I think that's for the best. Maybe we should have left the thinkers behind long ago. Maybe we should have stayed asleep. Maybe the winter is longer than we thought. I am trapped in my own home, but whatever you do, do not come help me. It is not worth it. You are not smarter than they are, and they will get you too. I am posting this here so that maybe, somehow, someone will see this and know what happened to me. My phone is about to die, but before it does, I want everybody who knew me to know that even though I am still alive, I want you to carry on as though I was dead. There is nothing anybody can do for me now. The cool, clear water was flowing down my head, streaming down my scalp and through my hair, rinsing away all of the microscopic particles of dead skin and dirt that were tangled in its strands. I flexed my muscles and let myself relax. The moving was done. No more being stuck in the van. No more sleeping on friends' couches. No more bathing in other people's showers. That was the part that I hated the most. For me, showering had always been this sacred part of the day, a time where I could be completely shielded from the outside world, just a few minutes in the morning where I could collect myself for the day to come. That was when I had my own place, with my own shower, but I found I could never really do that in someone else's shower. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an intruder, like I was invading somebody else's personal space. I always felt like I was wearing somebody else's clothes, like at any moment they would barge in and kick me out. But not anymore, I reminded myself. I have my own house now. This was even better than before. Before I was just renting an apartment, subject to the whims of some cranky old landlord. Now I had complete dominion over my space. I was its sole owner. That on its own was a goddamn miracle. Even for a property on the outskirts of town, I was able to scoop this place up unreasonably cheap. I would be able to pay off the entire mortgage in less than 7 years, even on my measly accountant's salary. Even thinking about it was enough to make me giddy. Breathing in, I forced my excitement back down and set to work on cleaning my hair, reaching for the shower shelf. Tap. I frowned, looking around. Shit, knocked something over. I scanned the shower floor for the victim of my clumsiness. Did it fall out of the tub? I was beginning to lean out to check the tile floor outside when suddenly, tap. It happened again. I turned around. I think that was the wall. I waited, not moving a muscle. Tap. As if to confirm my suspicions, I furrowed my brow. I stood there for at least a solid 10 minutes, searching for some sort of reasonable explanation, occasionally interrupted by the wall. I thought back to something I heard from an older coworker a few years back. See, the pipes had been making all sorts of weird noises for a few months, and the other day I just had enough, and I decided to call my son, the one who works as a plumber. And what he told me is that it's a water pressure thing. If you have too much water moving too quickly through a pipe, the water is going to slam against the sides of the pipes, which can make it rattle against the wall. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. But I needed to test it. If the water stops flowing through the pipes, it should stop making that knocking noise. I turned the shower knob all of the way back, and I waited for the taps to stop, but it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. Just tap, tap, tap. And so I decided to let it go. For weeks that knocking sound continued, non-stop, and for weeks I tried to keep from speculating about it. But curiosity stuck to my skin like a rash, and I could only stop myself from scratching it for so long. Tap, 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 tap. I found myself frowning. It's different. Something about it is different today. And as I worked conditioner through my hair, listening to the noise, I realized that I was right. Before, it always came in the same predictable pattern. There would be a knock, a pause, a knock, a longer pause. But today, the knocks were coming more erratically. They sounded almost apprehensive. It reminded me of the time I had to retrieve a baseball from my neighbor's backyard. I would tiptoe up to their front porch, nervously knocking once on the door, waiting, then knocking again, slightly louder. I was always terrified that some nasty-tempered man in a wife-beater would answer the door and start yelling at me. Tap, tap, tap. It was like it was waiting. Tap. But waiting for what? Tap, 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 tap. For an answer. Ta-tap. I leaned in towards the shower wall. Tap. And pressed my ear against it. And listened. Bang. I felt my heart shoot up into my chest. As I reflexively stumbled backwards, slipping on the slick shower floor and falling chest first onto the wall of the tub. If the wind hadn't been knocked out of me, I would have yelled in surprise and pain. The hit was not a knock, it was a decisive blow. The wall had been shaken by its impact so hard, it had knocked everything off of the shower shelf into the tub. The shampoo, conditioner, soap, body wash, everything scattered around the shower floor. As soon as I got my wits back, I scrambled to my feet and made for the door, wrapping a towel around my lower half. Turning the knob, I only stopped to glance back in horror at the shower wall. Tap, 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 tap. Tap. Tap, tap, tap. Several more weeks passed. I didn't like the new bathroom very much anymore. Hell, I can barely tolerate being in the same house as it. I began going to downright impractical lengths to avoid using it. Whenever I found I needed to go, I would get in my car and drive 15 minutes to the nearest fast food place. Eventually, though, this strategy became unsustainable. One day, I pulled into the parking lot and was immediately approached by the manager and told to leave. Shit, they must think I'm homeless, I thought to myself on the drive home. Funny thing was, they were kind of right. A home is a place where you feel safe, a place where you can let your guard down. I had no such place. That incident made me realize that I needed to find a way to bathe. I couldn't put it off any longer. I came up with the idea that I could get a gym membership to use their shower. Well, maybe that's a good long-term solution, but I need to clean myself now. I decided that I was going to wash up as best I could in the kitchen sink, but to do that, I need my shower supplies. I realized, heart dropping into my stomach. As I tiptoed up the stairs towards the bathroom, I found myself praying for the first time in years. Please God, let it be quiet. Tap, 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 tap. Deaf ears. I was in and out in a second. I practically ran in, scooped up the bare essentials I needed to bathe myself, and ran out, slamming the door behind me. Heart racing, I paced back down the stairs, piling my loot on the counter. I paused. If I listened closely enough, I could just barely hear the tapping sound upstairs. I pushed it from my mind and gave myself a moment to calm down. I began setting up my supplies next to the sink. Sighing, I removed my shirt and positioned my greasy scalp under the faucet, bracing myself for the sudden shock of cold water. But the shock of cold wasn't nearly as strong as the shock of hearing a shrill, anguished scream emerge from the drain. Where did he go? Where did you take him? I bolted up, banging my head against the uncompromising faucet. I have never, before or since, felt so horrified in my entire life. I live all on my own. I have no neighbors. Either somebody is breaking into my house or... What did you do to him? The voice was a feminine one, just slightly on the younger side. Maybe late 20s? Her voice was filled with despair. Tell me where he is. As I listened, I noticed something that made me feel sick. I don't need to strain to hear the knocking anymore, I realized, my heart sinking past my stomach through all of my guts and wrapping itself up in my intestines as if it was trying to hide. There was no point where I decided to sprint up the stairs, down the hall, through the doorway. My feet just carried me that direction, in my mindless, terrified trance. I froze as I watched the incomprehensible scene in front of me. Bam, 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 bam. An endless barrage of blows impacted the shower wall as if hundreds and hundreds of people were on the other side, pummeling the wall, desperately trying to break through. I felt something moving behind me. I spun around just fast enough to see the bathroom door swinging shut. Mortified, I moved to pull it back open, but the knob wouldn't budge. The door wasn't locked. Someone was holding it shut. The woman wasn't yelling anymore, just whispering through choked sobs. You're gonna take him, aren't you? That was all I needed to completely break down. I became a crazed animal, swinging and kicking and screaming. Let me out. Open the door. I spent what felt like weeks in that hellish room. The knocking never stopped, never weakened, and I never got used to it. The first few days I tried to wait it out. Somebody will come for me. Someone will find me. I just need to endure this torment long enough to receive their salvation. That hope disappeared when I went to call 911 and realized that I had no service or Wi-Fi. I started living like a rat, scurrying around the room, sniffing around for anything even remotely edible. Toothpaste was the first thing to go. It made me feel sick, but I was able to keep it down. For a few days I debated whether or not it was safe to eat a bar of soap. Do I even care? I did whatever I could to make my new prison as comfortable as possible. I dragged the bath mat over to the door, gathered up all of the towels and washcloths, and piled them into a makeshift little bed. I almost had to curl up into a ball to even fit on it. Whatever sleep I found was restless, and it only ever came when sheer exhaustion outweighed my paranoia. Every so often, as I was waking up, I swore I could feel something touching me, grabbing at my emaciated limbs, or dragging its fingers across my ribs like a xylophone. Day and night slipped by indistinguishably, with no way of gauging the passage of time. It all felt like a fever dream, fading in and out of consciousness. I would often wake up to find that I was in a different spot than the one I fell asleep in, but one day I opened my eyes and saw the same thing I saw when they were closed. I sat up, feeling around, reaching for the light switch. Instead, my hand brushed up against skin pulled tight over bone. I gagged. Someone is in the bathroom with me. I scurried backwards to get away, but I quickly collided with a wall of legs, whose owners started to shift around to find the source of the disturbance. Oh God, I'm not in the bathroom. And as I shot to my feet and pushed my way through the horde of naked bodies, I thought about the last thing that woman said. You're going to take him, aren't you? Do not mimic the culvert. My town's suburban legend of the culvert goes like this. In the 80s, some lady went missing after her husband caught her with not another man, but a creature. Some say he killed her, chopped her up into little pieces, and flushed her down the toilet in small batches until she was completely gone. Other, more ghoulish people claim she ran away with her creature lover to the sewage systems on the outskirts of town, where they lived out the rest of their days in foul-smelling bliss. Some swear they spotted the offspring, christened the culvert, near the pipes it calls home. Is said to have a strangely beautiful face, framed by a wide set of horns or antlers, with pale mottled skin, and a contorted figure draped in ragged, hand-stitched cloth. No video sightings of this creature exist. Even the local teens are too spooked to attempt a hoax. The legend warns that those who impersonate the culvert are fated to become it, and yet that's exactly what I set out to do. You probably think I'm an idiot for doing the one thing the legend warned against, and you're absolutely right. I'm well aware that this decision was absolutely the worst mistake I have ever made, so please don't lecture me in the comments. I just wanted to go viral. I foolishly crafted a smooth, expressionless papier-mâché mask with lofty deer antlers attached, sloppily sewed some rudimentary clothes, and painted my skin a patchy mix of red, purple, and ashen white. I set out for the sewers early in the morning, donning my costume and an old camcorder. The sewer's leaky mouth gaped wide, foreboding. My dinky flashlight illuminated graffiti-tattooed walls. A rat scampered between my feet, disappearing into the daylight behind me. As I delved deeper and deeper into the twisting pipes, beer cans and condom wrappers gave way to more unsettling litter. A waterlogged teddy bear begging for euthanasia, a wayward mannequin torso stripped bare. I filmed every eerie detail with morbid delight. I could not ignore the ghostly call of music emanating from the depths of the piping before me. It grew louder the further I ventured. My shoulders grew tense, my jaw set. The unfamiliar melody grew deafening as the tunnel sloped wide into a large iron chamber, dead end. When I sloshed in, the hair on the back of my neck instantly rose. It was adorned with dated but well-maintained furniture, a floral couch sealed in plastic, an ornate brass bed frame, and a solid wood kitchen table with 2 vinyl chairs. Seated there facing me was a woman. She was in her 60s or 70s, and markedly lovely. She wore a pristine bubblegum pink tracksuit with lipstick to match. She sat perfectly still, bolt upright, with her eyes peacefully closed. Surely something was wrong, but I could not place exactly what. I approached her tentatively, but with each step, my stomach dropped further. I laid a hand on her shoulder, and her head lolled to the side at an unnatural angle. Of course, she was dead. There was no smell, no sign of decay. How long had she been there? I was about to turn, about to collect my camera and sprint for the outside world when I felt the presence of someone directly behind me. I spun and locked eyes with what could only be the culvert. He stood there, blocking the only exit, attempting a disarming smile. He was tall and gaunt, stooping slightly to avoid hitting his head. His skin was sickly and translucent, with blue, purple, green ropey veins spidering right below the surface. He did not have antlers, as my classmates had once detailed, but his skull did jut out on either side, perhaps a deformity. His ribcage bulged, shoulders protruded. His face was fine, almost handsome, with milky blue eyes that looked pained, pleading. "I am only human," I screamed, loud. This sent him barreling towards me, fibrous limbs flailing about revoltingly. I stumbled backward, tripping over the corpse's stark white keds and slamming my head on the slimy floor. My eyes went blind for 1, 2, 3 seconds too long, and by the time I got my bearings, he was upon me, groping, pawing, whimpering like a spooked animal. Pins and needles prickled across my skin. When I jolted up against him, he did not budge, and engulfed my writhing wrists and ankles in his enormous hands. But those frosted eyes bore into mine, beseeching me. For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. What does he want? "Shh," he begged, brow pinched with concern and fear. He scooped me up and slid me beneath the bed as if I weighed nothing. He raised his palms toward me as if to say, "Stay put." I obeyed and held my breath as he rummaged around the room, turned off that hellish music, and preened the woman's corpse lovingly. They did bear a passing resemblance. Same black hair, delicate bone structure. My mind sprinted. What does he want? Why did he look scared? There must be something else down here. Something far worse. Maybe I should run. Before I could work up the nerve, he shuddered and let out a wheezing gasp. He dropped to his knees and cast one final pitying look at me. His bones snapped and twisted into something new, unrecognizable. The skull split under his scalp with a wet pop, forming mock antlers, stretching his thin scalp to a sickening degree. He screamed in agony as his eyes rolled back into their sockets, replaced by a glazed new set, shining in pitch black. I thought of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It stretched its limbs awkwardly and surveyed its surroundings. I was wrong. I despaired. That is the culvert. It sniffed the sour air indulgently, then spun around, jerking to a stop at the sight of me. What choice did I have? I bolted. The culvert roared, an enraged, guttural vibration I felt in my bones. I risked a glance backward and saw it squirming up the sewer pipe and sprinting along the ceiling on all fours. It was fast, but I was faster. At a fork in the piping, I hung a right, then a left, then a right again, just as I had when I ventured through not too long before. Just around this curve, I thought, expecting to be welcomed with sunshine. As I skidded around the corner, my stomach hitched, more inky darkness. How could I be lost? The layout was so simple. I paused, but the culvert's soggy footfalls endured punishingly, only moments behind. I pushed forward, lungs stinging with exertion, legs begging me to slow down. The tunnel stretched ceaselessly. I ran for what felt like hours, twisting through fork after fork, plunging deeper into the bowels of that infernal maze. I could not shut off the thoughts ricocheting inside my skull. You're dead. You're dead. Good is dead. I could swear the pipes were constricting, closing in on me. I peered over my shoulder only for a minute and clipped a rod on the floor, sending myself soaring forward and straight into the stagnant water below me. I crashed, hard, smacking my chin firmly on rusty metal. I must have blacked out, but only for a second. With a start, I pulled my face out of the oily water and gasped for air. It was in my nose, my eyes, my mouth. I blinked the mud out of my vision and was rewarded with daylight not 20 feet ahead of me. I scrambled on all fours towards the blinding afternoon, but was grasped by the thing at the last second. It wrestled me below the shallow surface again and again, but I thrashed with everything I had left. Its jaws split wider. Its wet inside squirmed forward, pouring down from the skull and dangling mere inches from my face in pulsing purple tendrils. It wants to be inside of me. I clamped my mouth shut and gave one more violent kick, setting it slightly off balance. I clambered to my feet and lunged for the light with everything I had left. Then I was out in the secluded woods. I forced my dazzled eyes open, searching desperately for the creature, but as I hoped, it did not follow me out of the sewer's yawning maw. I went straight to the police station, as any sane person would, but I tamed my story a bit for credibility. I've seen movies. The drive home felt eternal. All I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep for a few days. I didn't even care about the video, didn't mind that I had forgotten my camcorder or lost that mask in the melee. I wanted no reminders of this awful day. I peeled off my wet clothes, balled them up by the back door, and scrubbed my skin raw in the shower. I yearned for sleep, but my brain kept buzzing. I padded into the sunroom, hoping to catch the amber sunset. That's when I saw it. My mask, soggy, twisted, its jaws ripped wide, a warning. The air hung thick and putrid. I spotted a trail of muddy footprints leading to the wobbly glass door. A floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, and there, through the doorway, I glimpsed the edge of a tufted antler, one beady black eye. My heart leapt into my throat. Run for your life, my brain screamed. And I did. I've been camping out in my car for the past few hours. I'm not sure where else to go but the shopping mall. I watch people meander in and out of the ShopRite, trying to clear my thoughts, but I can't escape the visions of that thing. I envy these people, and their ignorance of the evil holdup right below their feet. I just keep waiting until the police give me a call, but I already know what they're going to say. The sewers are empty. The street lamps just kicked on, and the parking lot is growing scant. Soon, I'll be alone out here. I'll just have to keep scanning the horizon, searching for the culvert. When you drive through, please follow the traffic signs. If you're following the highway, take the off-ramp and take a sudden turn down an off-road. You might just drive past the old water tower, rusted out and clearly leaking from whatever rainwater made its way in. There's no welcome sign into the small town of Edgeport. It's a nothing town that you can drive through in about 15 minutes, just by following the main road. You won't find it on any maps. It's small enough to be roped into a few counties, so it's not on any registry. Only the locals know that Edgeport is a place unto itself and that you have to pay attention in Edgeport. I live in Edgeport. I don't really remember when I moved here. It feels like I've always been here, but on a sunny day I can feel a memory itching at the back of my head. A cityscape in autumn. I think it was New York, but I can never feel sure. I'm sitting on a park bench, and I feel like I was just talking to someone, but they're gone now. It's bittersweet, and I really wish I could remember them, but then the clouds roll in, and I'm here in Edgeport. It's not as bad as it might sound. Every day I wake up, I put myself together in the usual suit and tie. I commute to work, where I work a standard office job and hope that today won't be more data entry. It always is. I come home, take a shower, and the rest of my day belongs to me. I think the worst part is always the commute. You have to be vigilant, and if you see anything odd, you have to pay attention to it. I've had a few days over the weekend to collect myself, but I can't sit back and pretend these out-of-towners don't bother me anymore. You see a sign, you listen to the sign. How is that so damn hard for people? I suppose that I should get on with things and issue my cautionary tale. If for some reason the guy in the black sedan is reading this, hello again, please never drive through again. The day started like any other. I woke up, got ready, poured a cup of coffee, and got on my way to work. Hitting the main road, I was quickly met with two things. One, a brand new road sign off 3 Rod Street that said, if you see it, don't make eye contact. In white reflective letters, complete with a little silhouette of an eyeball. This is just how you know the rules that day. No one ever puts these signs up, and it's not always an actual sign, but there's always something like it around. So I slowed down and started to pay attention to anything out of the ordinary. That's when I was met with the second thing, a black sedan that refused to get off my bumper and made it well known he was unhappy that I was going 10 miles under the speed limit. It was clear he was from out of town and that he probably hadn't even seen the sign. I rolled my eyes and went about my business. We rode like this for a good 10 to 15 minutes before I suddenly stopped. Don't make eye contact. Felt like an understatement when, out of the corner of my eye, I could see an eyeball floating through the fog and getting ready to pass through the road. So I carefully busied myself pretending something had fallen down by my passenger seat, stealing half glances as the large eye stared down my car. Honk, honk. The man behind me must not have seen it. I saw the eye twitch white. It must have been looking back toward him. Who? He leaned on the horn. The eye disappeared, and all at once the honking stopped. I could have left. I should have left. People drive through here every day, ignore warnings, and only God knows what happens to them then. But he was right there, and before I knew it, I was on my way out the car door. In long, panicked strides, I walked over to the car window and began beating on the window. When that didn't work, I started beating on the windshield. Hey, you got a fucking problem, buddy. You fucking look at me when I'm talking. I couldn't come out and say it, not with that thing right over both of us, but if I could keep his attention, just maybe things would be okay. And as the man rolled his window down, I tried so hard not to be relieved. I turned every inch of fear and panic into anger and began my own road rage against the man. Didn't you see the sign, asshole? It's 35 through here, I shouted at the top of my lungs. I honestly didn't have much to be angry at, but had to keep it going, pretending that I didn't see it. I saw his eyes dart back to the eye and smacked my hand into the windshield once more. Hey, you look at me when I'm talking. I like to think that at that moment we both came to an understanding that I was just as scared as he was, that I knew what I was doing, and that if he listened to me, it would all go away. I had no idea if things would be okay, but maybe by following the letter of the warning we could get out of this. It's bad enough I have to make my way to the same shitty job every fucking day without morons like you on the roads. Now I gotta deal with my boss being a fucking asshole over me being late, and so I screamed at this random man. I started with traffic and moved into work as I could feel the humidity over my shoulder change, the man in front of me with tears welling up in his eyes, and I knew. It was right there, it was waiting, and it knew that I knew it. Don't start fucking crying now. You started this, asshole. It had to be inches away from me, just waiting for us to give up the act and look at it, so I kept going. This man became my personal therapist as I screamed about my life. My job slowly faded into my personal life. and when I ran out of things to shout about there, I'd just change the topic again and again and again. As time went by and people in the town understood, they would simply go around our cars, and we would keep pretending that this was normal. I was there for 3 hours before I could say it had left. I can tell you it was 3 hours because when I arrived at work, I was quickly called into the boss office for being 3 hours late, and when he finally looked at me, I was a disheveled husk of a man. My hair going in wild directions, suit creased and sweat stains all along my shirt, my face worn and tired as I had just been through a great ordeal. All he could ask was, "What happened?" Worry creasing his brow, he wasn't looking for answers for my sake, but his own, hoping that maybe he could avoid this. I sat down in the only available chair and I wept. I could not answer his question, but in that moment it truly hit me that it was over, and in my relief all I could do was cry. I sat in that office, my boss half-heartedly comforting me, my throat rough and my cry barely a whisper until he told me that I was free to go home. The very next day, driving through on my way to work yet again, I saw the same signpost with a black trash bag over the sign, and I know that when I drive through tomorrow, the sign will be completely gone. It's the only way to truly know that whatever strangeness has passed. This is the truth about the birdhouses my great-grandfather built in the hell that followed them. God, I'm so sorry, Eli. I promise I didn't know. My best friend died a week after my 12th birthday. His death wasn't anyone's fault. Eli was an avid swimmer. He may have looked scrawny at first glance, but put that kid in a body of water and he'd be outmaneuvering people twice his age, swimming vicious laps around stunned high school seniors like a barracuda. All the other kids who spent time in the lake were just tourists, foreigners who had a superficial understanding of the space. For Eli, it was different. He was a native, seemingly born and bred amongst the wildlife that also called the water their home. It was his element, which is why his parents were comfortable with him going to the lake alone. It was cloudy that day. Maybe an overcast concealed the jagged rock under the surface where Eli dove in, or maybe he was just too comfortable with the lake for his own good and wasn't paying enough attention. In the end, the mechanics of his death don't matter, but I found myself dwelling on them over the last 8 years all the same. Probably because they're a mystery, a well-kept secret between Eli and his second home. I like to imagine that he experienced no pain. If there was no pain, then his transition into the next life must have been seamless, I figured. One moment he was feeling the cold rush of the water cocooning around his body as he submerged, and then before his nerves could even register the skull fracture, he was gone. Gone to whatever that next cosmic step truly is, whether it's heaven, oblivion, or some other afterlife in between those two opposites. That's what I believed when I was growing up, at least. It helped me sleep at night, a comforting lie to quiet a grieving heart. Now though, I'm burdened with the truth. He didn't go anywhere. For the last 8 years, he's been closer than I could have ever imagined. My great-grandfather lived a long, storied life. Grew up outside of Mexico City in the wake of the revolution. Born the same year that Diaz was overthrown, actually. Immigrated to southern Texas in the 40s. Fought in World War II. Well, fought may be a strong word for his role in toppling the Nazi regime. Antonio's official title, Pigeoneer. For those of you who were unaware, carrier pigeons played a critical role in wartime communications well into the first half of the 20th century. The Allies had at least 250,000 bred for that sole purpose, renowned for their speed and accuracy in delivering messages over enemy-held territory. Where radios failed, pigeons were there to pick up the slack. And like any military battalion, they needed a trainer and a handler. That's where Antonio came in. It sounds absurd nowadays, but I promise it's all true. It wasn't something he just did on the side, either it was his exclusive function on the front line. When a batch of pigeons were shipped to his post, he'd evaluate them, separate the strong from the weak. The strong were stationed in a pigeon loft, which to my understanding was basically a fancy name for a coop that could send and receive messengers. The job fit him perfectly. Antonio's passion was ornithology. He grew up training seabirds to be messengers under the tutelage of his father, and he abhorred violence on principle. From his perspective, if he had to be drafted, there wasn't better outcome. That said, the front line was dangerous, even if you weren't an active combatant. One spring morning, German planes rained the breath of hell over Antonio and his compatriots. He avoided being caught in the actual explosive radius of any particular bomb, but a ricocheting fragment of hot metal still found its way to the center of his chest. The shrapnel, thankfully, was blunt. It fractured his sternum without piercing his chest wall. Even so, the propulsive energy translated through the bone and collided into his heart, silencing the muscle in an instant. Commotio cordis, medical jargon for a heart stopping from the sheer force of a blunt injury. The only treatment is defibrillation, the shock to restart its rhythm. No one knew that back then though. Even if they did, a portable version of the device wasn't invented until nearly 15 years after the war ended. On paper, I shouldn't exist. Neither should my grandmother, or her brother, or my mother, all of whom were born when Antonio returned from the front line. That spring morning, my great-grandfather should have died. But he didn't. The way his soldier buddies told it, they found him on the ground without a pulse, breathless, face waxy and drained of color, dead as doornail. After about 20 minutes of cardiac arrest, however, he just got back up, completely without ceremony, no big gasp to refill his starved lungs, no one pushing on his chest and pleading for his return, no immaculately timed electrocution from a downed power line to reinstitute his heartbeat. Simply put, Antonio decided not to die, scared his buddies half to death with his resurrection. Apparently, two of his comrades watched the whole thing unfold in stunned silence. Antonio opened his eyes, stood up, and kept on living like he hadn't been a corpse a minute prior, just started running around their camp, asking if the injured needed any assistance, nearly stopped their hearts in turn. He didn't even realize he had died. My great-grandfather came back tainted though. His conscious mind didn't recognize it at first, but it was always there. You see, as I understand it, some small part of Antonio remained where the dead go, and the most of him that did return had been exposed to the black ether of the hereafter. He was irreversibly changed by it, learned things he couldn't explain with human words, saw things his eyes weren't designed to understand. That one in a billion fluke of nature put him in a precarious position. When he came back to life, Antonio had one foot on the ground and the other foot in the grave, so to speak. Death seems to linger around my family. Not dramatically, mind you. No final destination bullshit. I'm talking cancer, drunk driving accidents, heart attacks, relatively typical ends. But it's all so much more frequent in my bloodline, and that seems to have started once Antonio got back from the war. His fractured soul attracted death. It hovered over him like a carrion bird above roadkill, but for whatever reason it never took him specifically, settling for someone close by instead. So, once my dad passed from a stroke when I was 6, there were only 3 of us left. Me, my mother, and Antonio. An hour after Ellis' body had been dredged from the lake, I heard an explosive series of knocks at our front door. A bevy of knuckles rapping against the wood like machine gun fire. At that point, he had been missing for a little over 24 hours, and that's all I knew. I stood in the hallway, a few feet from the door, rendered motionless by the noise. Implicitly, I knew not to answer, subconsciously aware that I wasn't ready for the grim reality on the other side. The concept of Eli being hurt or in trouble was something I could grasp, but him being dead, that felt impossible. Fantastical, like witchcraft or Bigfoot, the old died and the young lived. That was the natural order. Bending those rules was something an adult could do to make a campfire story extra scary, but nothing more. And yet, I couldn't answer the knocking. All I could do was stare at the dark oak of the door and bite my lip as Antonio and my mother hurried by me. My great-grandfather unlatched the lock and pulled it open. The music of death swept through our home, followed by Elise's parents shortly after. Sounds of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. The holy trinity of despair. Wails that wavered my faith in God. Mom guided me upstairs, while Antonio went to go speak with them in our kitchen. They were pleading with him, but I couldn't comprehend what they were pleading for. It's important to mention that Antonio's involuntary connection with the afterlife was a poorly kept secret in my hometown. I don't know how that came to be. It wasn't talked about in polite conversation. Despite that, everyone knew the deal. As long as you were insistent enough, my great-grandfather would agree to commune with the dead on your behalf, send and receive simple messages through the veil, not entirely unlike his trained pigeons. He didn't enjoy doing it, but I think he felt a certain obligation to provide the service on account of his resurrection. He must have sent back for a reason, right? Even at 12, I sort of understood what he could do. Not in the same way the townsfolk did. To them, Antonio was a last resort, a workaround to the finality of death. I'm sure they believed he had control of the connection, and that he wasn't putting himself at risk when he exercised that control. They needed to believe that, so they didn't feel guilty for asking. I unfortunately knew better. Antonio lived with us since I was born. Although my mother tried to prevent it, I was subjected to his episodes many times throughout the years. About an hour later, I fell asleep in my mom's arms, out of tears and exhausted from the mental growing pains. As I was drifting off, I could still hear the muffled sounds of Ellie's parents talking to Antonio downstairs. The walls were thin, but not thin enough for me to hear their words. When I woke up the following morning, two things had changed. First, Antonio's extensive collection of birdhouses had moved. Under normal circumstances, his current favorite would be hung from the largest blue spruce in our backyard, with the remaining 20 stored in the garage, stacked where our car used to be before we were forced to sell it. Now, they were all in the backyard. In the dead of night, Antonio had erected a sprawling aerial metropolis, boxes with varying colorations, entrance holes, and rooftops hung at different elevations among the trees, roughly in the shape of a circle a few yards from the kitchen window. Despite that, I didn't see an uptick in the number of birds flying about our backyard. Quite the opposite. Honestly, I can't recall ever seeing a bird in our backyard again after that. Whatever was transpiring in that enclosed space, the birds wanted no part of it, but between the spruce's densely packed silver blue needles and the wooden cityscape, it was impossible for me to tell what it was like at the center of that circle just by looking at it. Which dovetails into the second change. From that day forward, I was forbidden to go near the circle under any circumstances. In fact, I wasn't allowed to play in the backyard at all anymore, my mom added, sitting across from me at the breakfast table that morning, sporting a pair of black and blue half crescents under her eyes that signaled she had barely slept. I protested, but my mom didn't budge an inch. If I so much as stepped foot in the backyard, there would be hell to pay, she said. When I found I wasn't making headway, arguing about how unfair that decision was, I pivoted to asking her why I wasn't allowed to go in the backyard anymore, but she wouldn't give me an answer to that question either. So, wrought with grief and livid that I wasn't getting the full story, I told my mom in no uncertain terms that I was going to do whatever I wanted and that she couldn't stop me. Slowly, she stood up, head down, her whole body tremoring like an earthquake. Then she let go. All the feelings my mother was attempting to keep chained to her spine for my benefit broke loose, and I faced a disturbing mix of fear, rage, and misery. Lips trembling, veins bulging, and tears streaming. Another holy trinity of despair. Honestly, it terrified me. Scared me more than the realization that anyone could die at any time, something that came hand in hand with Ela's passing. I didn't argue after that. I was much too afraid of witnessing that jumbled wreck of an emotion spilling from my mom again to protest. So, the circle of birdhouses remained unexplored, Antonio's actions there remaining unseen, unquestioned. Until last night. Now I know everything. And this post is my confession. Antonio's episodes intensified after that. Before Eli died, they'd occur about once a year. Now they were happening every other week. Mom or I would find him running around the house in a blind panic, face contorted into an expression of mind-shattering fear, unsure of who he was or where he was. Unsure of everything, honestly, save one thing that he was damn sure about. "I want to get out of here," he'd whisper, mumble, shout, or scream. Every episode was a little bit different in terms of his mannerisms or his temperament, but the tagline remained the same. It wasn't senility. Antonio was 87 years old when Eli died, so chalking his increasingly frequent outbursts up to the price of aging was my mom's favorite excuse. On the surface, it may have seemed like a reasonable explanation. But if senility was the cause, why was he so normal between episodes? He could still safely drive a car, assist me with math homework, and navigate a grocery store. His brain seemed intact, outside the hour or two he spent raving like a madman every so often. The same could be said for his body. He was remarkably spry for an octogenarian. Week after week, his episodes kept coming, banging on the walls of our house, reaching for a doorknob that wasn't there, eyes rolled back inside his skull, shaking me awake at 3 a.m, begging for me to help him get out of here. Notably, Antonio's sessions started around the same time. Every few days, Alice's parents would again arrive at our door. The knocking wouldn't be as frantic, and the soundtrack of death would be quieter, but I could still see the misery buried under their faces. They exuded grief, puffs of it jetting out of them with every step they took, like a balloon with a small hole in the process of deflating. But there was something else there too. A new emotion my 12-year-old brain had a difficult time putting a name to. It was like hope without the brightness. Big, colorless smiles. Wide, empty eyes. Seeing their uncanny expressions bothered the hell out of me, so as much as I wanted to know what they were doing with Antonio in the basement for hours on end, I stayed clear, just accepted the phenomenon without questioning it. If my mom's reaction to those birdhouses taught me anything, it's that there are certain things you're better off not knowing. Fast forward a few years. Antonio was having sessions daily, sometimes multiple times a day, each with different people. Whatever he had been doing in the basement with Elise's parents, these strangers had come to want that same service. There was only one common thread shared by all of Antonio's guests too. Someone they loved had died sometime after the circle of birdhouses in our backyard appeared. As his sessions increased, our lives began improving. Mom bought a car out of the blue, a luxury we had to sell to help pay for Dad's funeral when I was much younger. There were talks of me attending to college. I received more than one present under the Christmas tree, and I was allowed to go wherever I wanted for dinner on my birthday, cost be damned. Meanwhile, Antonio's episodes continued to become more frequent and unpredictable. It got so bad that Mom had to lock his bedroom door from the outside at night. She told me it was for his protection, as well as ours. Ultimately, I found myself shamefully relieved by the intervention. We were safer with Antonio confined to his room while we slept. But that didn't mean we were shielded from the hellish clamor that came with his episodes, unfortunately. Like I said, the walls were thin. One night when I couldn't sleep, I snuck downstairs, looking to pop my head out the front door and get some fresh air. The inside of our house had a tendency to wick up moisture and hold onto it for dear life, which made the entire place feel like a greenhouse during the summer. Crisp night air had always been the antidote, but sometimes the window in my bedroom wasn't enough. When that was the case, I'd spend a few minutes outside. For most of my childhood, that wasn't an issue. Once we started locking Grandpa in his room while we slept, however, I was no longer allowed downstairs at night, so I needed to sneak around. When I passed Antonius' room that night, I stopped dead in my tracks. My head swiveled around its axis, now on high alert, scanning the darkness. His door was wide open. I don't think he was inside the house with me, though. The last thing I saw as I sprinted on my tiptoes back the way I came was a faint yellow-orange glow emanating from our backyard and through the kitchen window. I briefly paused, eyes transfixed by the ritual taking place behind our house. After that, I wasn't sprinting on my tiptoes anymore. I was running on my heels, not caring if the racket woke up my mom. On each of the 20 or so birdhouses, there was a single lit candle. Above the circle framed by the trees and the birdhouses, there was a plume of fine, wispy smoke like incense. But it didn't look like the smoke was rising out of the circle. Somehow it looked like it was being funneled into it. Earlier that day, our town's librarian, devoted husband and father of 3, had died in a bus crash. Why are they called birdhouses if the birds don't actually live there, Abuelito? I asked, sitting on the back porch one evening with Antonio, 3 years before Elise's death. He smiled, put a weathered copy of Flowers for Algernon down on his lap, and thought for a moment. When he didn't immediately turn towards me to speak, I watched his brown eyes follow the path of a robin. The bird was drifting cautiously around a birdhouse that looked like a miniature floating gazebo. He enjoyed observing them. Although Antonio was kind and easy to be around, he always seemed tense, stressed by God knows what. Watching the birds appeared to quiet his mind. Eventually, the robin landed on one of the cream-colored railings and started nipping at the birdseed piled inside the structure. While he bought most of his birdhouses from antique shops and various craftspeople, he'd constructed the gazebo himself, a labor of love. Patiently, I waited for him to respond. I was used to the delay. Antonio physically struggled with conversation. It often took him a long time to respond to questions, even simple ones. It appeared like the process of speech required an exceptional amount of focus. When he finally did speak, it was always a bit off-putting too. The volume of voice would waver at random. His sentences lacked rhythm, speeding up and slowing down unnaturally. It was like he couldn't hear what he was saying as he was saying it, so he could not calibrate his speech to fit the situation in real time. Startled by a car horn in the distance, the robin flew away. His smile waned. He did not meet my eyes as he spoke. Nowadays they're a refuge. A safe place to rest, somewhere protected from bad weather with free bird food, like a hotel almost. But that wasn't always the case. A long time ago, when life was harder and food was harder to come by, they were made to look like a safe place for the birds to land, even though they weren't. 9-year-old me gulped. The unexpectedly heavy answer sparked fear inside me, and fear always made me feel like my throat was closing up. A preview of what was to come, perhaps a premonition of sorts. Do you know what the word trap means? I nodded. 3 months ago, I was lying on the living room couch, attempting to get some homework done. Outside, late evening had begun to transition into true night. The sun had almost completely disappeared over the horizon. Darkness flooded through the house. The type of dull, orange-tinted darkness that can descend on a home that relies purely on natural light during the day. When I was a kid, turning a light bulb on before the sun had set was a cardinal sin. The waste of electricity gave my dad palpitations. That said, money wasn't an issue anymore. I hadn't been for a long while. I was free to drive up the electricity bill to my heart's content, and no one would have batted an eye. Still, I couldn't stomach the anxiety that came with turning them on early. Old habits die hard, I guess. When I had arrived home from the day's classes at a nearby community college, I was disappointed to find that Mom was still at her cancer doctor appointment, which meant I was alone with Antonio. His room was on the first floor, directly attached to the living room. The door was ajar and unlatched, 3 differently shaped locks dangling off the knob, swinging softly in a row like empty gallows. Through the open door, down a cramped, narrow hallway, I spied him sitting on the side of his bed, staring at the wall opposite to his room's only window. He didn't greet me as I entered the living room, didn't so much as flinch at the stomping of my boots against the floorboards. That wasn't new. Sighing, I dropped my book on the floor, aside the couch, and buried my face in my hands. I couldn't concentrate on my assigned reading, futilely rereading the same passage over and over again. My mind kept drifting back to Antonio, that immortal living statue gawking at nothing only a few feet away from me. It was all so impossibly peculiar. The man cleaned himself, ate food, drank water. According to his doctor, he was remarkably healthy for someone in their mid-90s too. He was on track to make it 100, maybe more. But he didn't talk, not anymore, and he moved only when he absolutely needed to. His sessions with all the grieving townsfolk had long since come to an end because of his mutism. Ely's parents, for whatever it's worth, were the last to go. His strange candlelight vigils from within the circle of birdhouses hadn't ended with the sessions, though. I'd seen another taking place the week prior as I pulled out of the driveway in my mom's beat-up sedan, on my way to pick up a pack of cigarettes. The thought of him surrounded by his birdhouses in dead of night doing God knows what made a shiver gallop over my shoulders. When I pulled my head from my hands, the sun had fully set, and house had darkened further. I couldn't see through the blackness into Antonio's room. I snapped out of my musings and scrambled to flick on a light, gasping with relief when it turned on, and I saw his frame glued to the same part of the bed he had been perched on before, as opposed to gone and crawling through the shadows like a nightmare. I scowled, chastising myself for being such a scaredy cat. With my stomach rumbling, I reached over to unzip my bag stationed on a nearby ottoman. I pulled a single wrapped cookie from it and took a bite, sliding back into my reclined position, determined to make a dent in my American literature homework. Needed to be halfway done. A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley before I went to sleep that night. As I tried to get comfortable, I could tell something was desperately wrong. My throat felt dry and tight. My skin itched. My guts throbbed. The breath in my chest felt coarse, like my lungs were filled to capacity with asphalt pebbles and shards of broken glass. I shot up and grabbed the cookie's packaging. There was no ingredient label on it. My college's annual spring bake sale had been earlier that day, so the treat had probably been individually wrapped by whoever prepared it. I was told the cookie contained chocolate chips and nothing else. I specifically asked if there were tree nuts in the damn thing, to which the organizer said no. My vision blurred. I began wheezing as I stood up and dumped the contents of my backpack on the ground, searching for my EpiPen. I wobbled, rulers, and pencils, and textbooks raining around my feet. Despite being deathly allergic to pecans, I had only experienced one true episode of anaphylaxis prior to that night. The experience was much worse than I remembered. Felt like my entire body was drying out, desiccating from a grape to a raisin in the blink of an eye. Before I could locate the life-saving medication, I lost consciousness. I don't believe I fully died, not to the same extent that Antonio had at least. It's hard to say anything about those moments with certainty though. The next thing I knew, a tidal wave of oxygen was pouring down my newly expanded throat. I forced my eyes open. Antonio was kneeling over me, silent but eyes wide with concern, holding the used EpiPen in his hand. He helped me up to a sitting position on the couch and handed me my cell phone. I thanked him and dialed 911. Figuring paramedics should still check me out even if the allergic reaction was dying down. I found it difficult to relay the information to the dispatcher, not because of my breathing or my throat, I could speak just fine by then. I was distracted. There was a noise that hadn't been there before I passed out. A distant chorus of human voices. They were faint, but I could still appreciate a shared intonation. All of them were shouting. 10, 20, 30 separate voices, each fighting to yell the loudest. And all of them originated from somewhere inside Antonio. Yesterday afternoon at 5:42 p.m., my mother passed away, and I was there with her to the bitter end. Antonio stayed home. The man could have come with me. He wasn't bedbound. He just wouldn't leave, even when I told him what was likely about to happen at the hospice unit. It may seem like I'm glazing over what happened to her. The cancer, the chemotherapy, the radiation. I don't deny that I am. That particular wound is exquisitely tender, and most of the details are irrelevant to the story. There are only two parts that matter: the terrible things that she disclosed to me on her deathbed, and what happened to her immediately after dying. I raced home, careening over my town's poorly maintained side streets at more than twice the speed limit, my mother's confession spinning wildly in my head. As I got closer to our neighborhood, I tried to calm myself down. I let my foot ease off the accelerator. She must have been delirious, I thought, drunk on the liquor of near death, the toxicity of her dying body putting her into a metabolic stupor. I, other the hand, must have been made temporarily insane by grief, because I had genuinely believed her outlandish claims. We must have gotten the money from somewhere else. As our house grew on the horizon, however, I saw something that sent me spiraling into a panic once more. A cluster of twinkling yellow-orange dots illuminated my backyard, floating above the ground like some sort of phantasmal bonfire. I didn't even bother to park properly. My car hit the driveway at an odd angle, causing the right front tire to jump the curb with a heavy clunk. The sound and the motion barely even fazed me, my attention squarely fixed on the circle of birdhouses adorned with burning candles. I stopped the engine with only half of the vehicle in the driveway, stumbling out the driver's side door a second later. In the 3 months that followed my anaphylaxis, I could hear the chorus of shouting voices when Antonio was around, but only when he was very close by. The solution to that existential dilemma was simple: avoid my great-grandfather like the plague. As long as I was more than a few feet away, I couldn't hear them, and if I couldn't hear them, I didn't have to speculate about what they were. Something was different last night, though. I heard the ethereal cacophony the moment I swung open my car door. Dozens of frenzied voices besieged me as I paced into the backyard, shouting over each other, creating an incomprehensible mountain of noise from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It only got louder as I approached the circle. The cacophony didn't dissuade me, though. If anything, the hellish racket inspired me. I felt madness swell behind my eyes as I got closer and closer. Hot blood erupted from my pounding heart and pulsed through my body. I was finally going to see the innards of that goddamned forbidden circle. I was finally going to know. No more secrets, no more lies. I spied a small area low to the ground where the foliage was thinner and there wasn't a birdhouse blocking the way. I ducked down and slammed my body through the perimeter head first, spruce tree needles scraping against my face as I pushed through. And then, near silence. When my head reached the inside, the voices had disappeared, and the only thing that replaced them was the pulpy sounds of a chewing jaw. Soft, moist grinding of teeth, like a child working through a mouth overfilled with saltwater taffy. But there was no child, only Antonio, standing with back to me, making those horrific noises. Whatever he was eating it ravenously. It sounded like he barely even paused to swallow after each voracious bite. His arms kept reaching into something suspended in the air by a metal chain that was tethered to the thick branches above us, but I couldn't see what exactly it was with him in the way. The trees that formed the circle had grown around some invisible threshold that divided the center from the world outside, forming a tightly sealed dome. The inside offered no view of the birdhouses and their candles, however the space was still incredibly bright, almost blindingly so. Not only that, but the brightness looked like candlelight, flickered like it too, but there wasn't a single candle present on the inside and I couldn't see out into the rest of the backyard. The dense trees obscured any view of the outside. Wispy smoke filtered in from the dome's roof through a small opening that the branches seemed to purposefully leave uncovered, falling onto whatever was directly in front of Antonio. I took a hesitant step forward, and the crunch of a leaf under my boot caused the chewing to abruptly end. His head shot up and his neck straightened. The motions were so fluid, they shouldn't have been possible from a man that was nearly a century old. I can't stop replaying the moment he turned in my head. Antonio swung his body to face me, cheeks dappled with some sort of greasy amber, multiple yellow-brown chunks hanging off his skin like jelly. A layer of glistening oil coated the length of his jawline. It gushed from his mouth as well as the amber chunks, forming a necklace of thick marigold-colored globules dangling off his chin, their strands reaching as low as his collarbone. Some had enough weight to drip off his face, falling into a puddle at his feet. His hands were slick with the same unidentifiable substance. And while he stared at me, stunned, I saw the object he had initially been blocking. An immaculately smooth alabaster birdhouse, triple the size of any other in our backyard, hanging from the metal chain. 2 human pelvic bones flared from its roof like a pair of horns. The bones weren't affixed to the structure via nails or glue. The edges where they connected to the birdhouse looked too smooth, too polished. No, it appeared to me like they had grown from it. A chimney between those horns seemed to funnel the smoke into the box. There was a quarter-sized hole in the front of it, which was still oozing the amber jelly, cascading from the opening like viscous crystalline sausage links. With Antonio's body out of the way, I heard a disembodied voice. It wasn't shouting like the others. It was whimpering apologetically, its somber melody drifting off the smoke and into my ears. I recognized it. It was Mom's. I took another step forward, overloaded and seething. When I did, Antonio finally spoke. Inside the circle, he didn't have any trouble talking, but his voice seemed to echo, his words quietly mirrored with a slight delay by a dozen other voices. Listen, just listen. I have to keep eating. If I die, then everyone inside me dies too. You wouldn't want that, right? If I decide to stop eating, that's akin to killing them. It's unconscionable. Your mother isn't ready to go. Either, nice why me, you're doing this. I know she told you the truth. I know you can hear them now too. That's okay. I can teach you how to cope with it. We can all still be together. As long as I keep eating, I'll never die, which means no one else will, either. I've seen the next place, the black ether. This is better, trust me. It's as... My breathing became ragged. I took another step. Don't look at me like that. This isn't my fault. I figured out how to do it, sure, but it wasn't my idea. Your mother told me it would be a one-time thing. Save Eli and keep him here, for him and his parents' sake. Right, what's wrong, Antonio? She said. Make life a little more fair, they pleaded. But people talk, and once it got out that I could prevent a person from passing on by eating them, then half the town wanted in on it. Everyone wanted to spend extra time with their dearly departed. I was just the vessel to that end. All the while, the smoke, my mother's supposed soul, continued to billow into the birdhouse. What came out was her essence made tangible, a material that had been processed and converted into something Antonio could consume. Don't forget, you benefited from this too. It was your mother's idea to make a profit off of it. She phrased it as paying tribute, not compensation, not a service fee. But we all knew what it was. Financial incentive for us to continue defying death. You like those Christmas presents, yes? You're enjoying college. What do you think paid for it? Who do you think made the required sacrifices? The voices under his seemed to become more agitated, in synchrony with Antonio himself. I've lost count of how many I have inside me. It's so goddamn loud. This sanctuary is the only place I can't hear them, swirling and churning and pleading in my gut. I used to be able to pull one to surface and let them take the wheel for a while, let them spend time with the still living through me. But now it's too chaotic, too cramped. I'm too full, and there's nowhere for them to go, so they've all melded together. When I try to pull someone specific up, I can't tell who they even are, or if I'm pulling up half a person or 3. They all look the same, moldy amalgamations mindlessly begging to be brought to the surface. But I'm saving them from something worse. The birdhouses. The conclave. It guides them here. I light the candles, and they know to come. I house them, protect them from drifting off to the ether. And as long as I keep eating, I'll never die, which means they get to stay as well. You wouldn't ask me to kill them, would you? You wouldn't damn them to the ether. I can still feel him, you know? Eli, he's still here. I'm sorry that you never got to experience him through me. Your mother strictly forbade it, called the whole practice unnatural while hypocritically reaping the benefits of it. I would bring him up now, but I've been able to reach him for the last few years. He's too far buried, but in a sense he still gets to live, even if he can't surface like he used to. Surely you wouldn't ask me to stop eating, then you wouldn't ask me to kill Eli. I know he wouldn't want to die. I know him better than you ever did. Now. I lunged at Antonio, tackled him to the ground aside the alabaster birdhouse. I screamed at him. No words, just a guttural noise, a sonic distillation of my fear and agony. Before long, I had my hands around his throat, squeezing. He tried to pull me off, but it was no use. His punches had no force, and there was no way he could pry my grip off his windpipe. Even if the so-called eating had prolonged his life, plateaued his natural decay, it hadn't reversed his aging. Antonio still had the frail body of 80-something-year-old, no matter how many souls he siphoned from the atmosphere, luring them into this trap before they could transition to the next life. His face turned red, then purple-blue, and then it blurred out completely. It was like hundreds of faces superimposed over each other. The end result was an unintelligible wash of skin and movement. The sight made me devastatingly nauseous, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. The punches slowed. Eventually they stopped completely. My scream withered into a low, continuous grumble. I blinked. In the time it took for me to close and reopen my eyes, the candle-lit dome in the alabaster birdhouse had vanished. Then it was just me, straddling Antonio's lifeless body in our backyard, a starless night draped over our heads. All of his other birdhouses still hung on the nearby spruce trees, but each and every candle had gone out. I thought I heard a whisper, scarcely audible. It sounded like Mom. I couldn't tell what she said, if it really was her. And then silence. For the first time in a long while, the space around me felt empty. I was truly alone. Now, I think I can leave. I know I need to move on, start fresh somewhere else and try again. But in order to do that, I feel like I have to leave these experiences behind. As much as I can, anyway. Confession feels like a good place to begin that process, but I have no one to confess to. I wiped out the last of our family by killing Antonio. So, this post will have to be enough. And not naive. I know these traumatic memories won't slough me like snakeskin just because I've put them into words. But ceremony is important. When someone dies, we hold a funeral in their honor, and then we bury them. No one expects the grief to disappear just because their body is 6 feet under, and yet we still do it. We maintain the tradition. This is no different. My mother's cremated remains will be ready soon. Once I have them, I'll scatter them over Antonio's grave. The one I dug last night, in the center of the circle of birdhouses still hanging in our backyard. This is a eulogy as much as it is confession, I suppose. My loved ones weren't evil. Antonio just wanted to help the community. My mother just wanted to give me a better life. Their true sin was delving into something they couldn't possibly understand, believing they could control it safely, twist it to their own means. Antonio, of all people, should have understood that death is sacred. It's not fair, but it is universal, and there's a small shred of justice in that fact, worthy of our respect. I hope Antonio and my mother are resting peacefully. I haven't forgiven them yet. Someday I will, but today isn't that day. I'm so sorry, Eli. I promise I didn't know. All that said, I can't help but feel like I'll never truly rid myself of my great-grandfather's curse. As Antonio consumed more, he seemed to have more difficulty speaking. The people accumulating inside him were too loud. I've assumed that he couldn't hear them until after he started eating. Remember my recollection of Antonio explaining the origin of birdhouses? That happened 3 years before Alila's death, and at that time he had the same difficulty speaking. It was much more manageable, yes, but it was there. That means he heard voices of the dead his entire life, even if he never explicitly said so from his near-death experience onward. I'm mentioning this because I can still hear something too. I think I can, at least. Antonio's dead, but maybe his connection to the ether didn't just close when he took his last breath. Maybe it got passed on. Maybe death hovers over me like a carrion bird now. Or maybe, hopefully, I'm just hearing things that aren't really there. He loves trains. His name is Charlie. We met the summer of my 8th grade year of middle school. He moved into the house next door that once belonged to the McFarlands. Charlie was an awkward kid with round glasses and buck teeth. He had sandy, blonde hair and was rather skinny. My parents decided that we should knock on his family's door and introduce ourselves a few days after they settled down. His mom was a beautiful blonde lady. She looked as if Wendy Peppercorn aged into a mother but still could hold the attention of a boy. Her name was Sally. His dad was starting to bald and a bit bulky-sized. He wore square-framed glasses and had a very polite approach to him. Every memory I seen of him was that he usually was wearing dress pants and a button-up shirt to match. His name was Randall, or Randy as he wished to be called. I usually called him Mr. Wilkes. They opened the door when Dad knocked, and he immediately shook hands with all of us. Charlie came up behind him and seen me holding my baseball glove and ball. I asked if he wanted to play catch in the yard. His dad politely but firmly instructed us, "Please don't throw anywhere near that car." He pointed at a well-taken care of 1967 Ford Mustang, named her after my wife. Me and Charlie spent the next few weeks playing catch daily and getting to know about one another. He made one thing clear to me: he loved trains. He showed me his room one day, and it was filled with model trains. He could tell me the details and names of parts, how they worked, and everything that would bore a teenage boy. One day after playing video games at my ask, he asked a very innocent question: "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I took a sip from my Coke can and thought a second. "I'd like to be a pro baseball player. Dad says I'm the best first baseman he's ever seen." "I want to be a train." "You mean a train conductor?" Yeah, something like that." I told him about a hill near the house where we could ride our bikes to and be able to watch trains pass through where the tracks lay. He immediately followed me there. We'd sit there most evenings and talk and watch as a train would pass through, until Steve approached us. Steve was a hobo who approached us and asked if we had any money. I didn't, but offered to bring him some food whenever I'd visit again. It would be easy to get some soup cans from the cupboard, and I figured Mom and Dad would think it awfully kind of me to help out a man in need. The next day when we went, Steve was waiting for us. We gave him some snacks and goods. He began to tell Charlie stories of him hopping trains and all the things he's seen. The next few days I would go knock at his family's door, and his mom would tell me that he took off on his bike already. I'd go up there and he was hanging out with Steve. It began creeping me out. The last time I rode up there and seen them talking, Steve began to walk down the hill to his little camp he had set up in the woods. I hollered his name out and waved my hand. He looked back and I swore his eyes were pitch black. A smell traced through the wind to us, and it smelled like rotting eggs. A cold shiver went down my back. Steve said he could help me out. Charlie stared out at the tracks without looking at me. "Help with what?" "My dream." "Your dream?" Fear crept through me. "Yes." "What dream is that exactly?" "Becoming a train conductor. You gotta go to school for that, I'm pretty sure." "Let's go ride back home." "I don't think we should come here anymore. Our parents probably don't want us hanging out with Steve all the time." "Don't you stop me." For the first time I heard anger in his voice. "Charlie, I think." He pushed me and yelled, "Don't stop me." We rode home in silence. I told my parents the truth and watched as Mom pulled out her phone and called Sandy. The next few days I would look out my window and see that Charlie was never outside. I wasn't in much trouble, but I heard Randy told Charlie that he wasn't allowed to leave the house for a week and would have to apologize for pushing me. We got home from Blockbuster one evening, and me and Dad had big plans to watch some action movies and play some sports games on my PlayStation 2. He grabbed popcorn and ice cream from the grocery store. We noticed our neighbor's door was wide open. It looked like a leg was hanging out the door. Dad walked over to their porch and I immediately followed. "Oh my God, call the police," he yelled as he tried to push me out of the way, not before I seen what happened. Randall and Sandy were dead on the ground. They were soaked in blood. My mom let out a scream that I'll never forget. Dad ran into the house to see if Charlie was there. Mom was pulling out her phone. I had a gut feeling. I hopped on my bike and drove to the hill. I just knew Charlie did this. Mom screamed for me to stop. I yelled back, "Tell them to go by our hangout." I pedaled as quick as my legs would let me. I ran down the hill and seen Charlie standing on the train tracks. I walked up behind him. He held a blood-soaked kitchen knife in his hand. "What did you do?" I held up my end of the deal. "Drop the knife and talk to me." He dropped it. "Charlie, the cops are on their way. The transformation will be done by then." "Transformation? You aren't making sense." "Charlie," I grabbed his shoulder and screamed. He turned around and his eyes were bright lights that were blinding to me, as if they were a train light. Steam was coming out of his ears and he opened his mouth and his scream was just like a train whistle. My eardrums felt like they could explode. He grabbed my shoulders and knocked me down to my back. The train whistle scream kept pouring out between his laughs. The only time I could hardly see was when he was blinking. My hands desperately were reaching to find something. I grasped onto a rock and hit him in the head with it. I managed to stand up and sprint back up the hill while he laid there still. I ran into the headlights where my mom caught me as I fell. Cops sprinted down to the tracks and I explained to one what happened. A few days go by and all the news reporters camping outside of our house were waiting for us. My story wasn't believable by no means to them. They did go with kid kills parents and runs off with a homeless man. Some time goes by and I managed to ride to the track. I heard a whistle and seen as a train was slowly moving along. I walked down the woods line and hid behind a tree. The front of the train had features that looked similar to the face of Charlie. The conductor was Steve. He lifted his hat and winked at me. His eyes were black and little horns poked out the top of his head. The police made their statement, and it gets brought up every year. The boy who killed his parents was never found, but he passes through our town every so often. Oh, Romeo. Many children grow up with a pet in their home. It seems to many parents that adopting a family dog or cat is a ritual worth participating in. Perhaps the parents of these children believe that the animal will teach them responsibility. Possibly, it is that in a decade or so, that dog's demise will introduce your child to death in a way that your words will not be able to accomplish. Will man's best friend be a reliable option for your kid to fall back on in case nobody likes him at school? Regardless of the reasoning, countless families across the US will adopt a dog to fill a conscious or subconscious void within their homes. What is never questioned is the dog itself, although it is essential for all these familial quirks to take shape. Its entire being is only in the hands of man to mold. The dog's purpose is only to absorb man's presence. We provide everything for them to survive, and we receive their unconditional love. Romeo wasn't our family's first choice when we started to look for a dog to accompany our current one, Chloe. I was scrolling through pictures on my mom's old phone, smiling at possible new boxer puppies from the same breeder we had received Chloe. Boxers you may recognize as the bigger versions of a French bulldog, with mouth flaps, floppy ears, and a burnt snub tail. This first set of puppies would get parvo, a terrible, fatal, and contagious puppy disease. When I found out, I hid my face in my parents' bed sheets and attempted to hide myself crying. The next candidate was Romeo, an AKC registered, but self-described accident puppy by the Craigslister. According to him, he left 2 show dogs in the back seat while he ran inside to grab something. He returned minutes later to foggy windows, smelly van. I drove shotgun with my dad to pick him up. When we arrived, I had to wait in the car while my dad went inside to retrieve him. I remember he was cautious. Wait in here. You don't know what it could be like in there. What felt like forever passed to a child who was about to meet his new puppy. I eventually peered over the passenger window as I saw my father stumble out the door and down the concrete porch. A dog barked loudly as he did. The original owners waved from inside their house. My dad walked to my side and put the puppy in my lap. He got in on his side and immediately exclaimed about how large the puppy's parents were. He joked that he felt threatened taking the baby from his parents, but that he knew we would give him a great home to live in. Romeo had a large cone head and tons of loose cedar red skin. It was clear he had plenty of room to grow into. As Romeo aged slightly, we realized through the vet that his testicles would not drop from an area in his stomach into where they are supposed to naturally fall. Because of this, he was required to receive essentially the same surgery that female dogs receive when they are spayed. My family attributed this to his seemingly unique personality that he would develop over the years. I noticed Romeo was different from other male boxers when I visited one of my childhood friend's house. His dog was pretty much the opposite of Romeo. He was built like a taller pit bull and was incredibly broad with a beefy build. He had tons of energy while bouncing off couches and people. This contrasted Romeo's lanky build as well as his calm and collected energy. My family and I describe him as just another person when he sits on the couch. He sits on his butt and slouches his back into the cushions. His head sits slightly back, adjusting to his weight in the couch cushion. Sometimes he stares out his window. I know he longs only to protect his yard, because he often stops himself and turns around less than a mile into our attempted walks. When you look into his black eyes, it feels like a window on board the ISS. It is easy to stare, and there is no potential awkwardness of natural human nature. At times they looked back at me, and I would wonder if they studied mine too. My family and I adjusted to his behavior over the years. He had very quickly inserted himself as a loved and trusted member of our family. Chloe was 7 years old when she passed. It was pretty sudden, and the vets didn't know what it was. They had asked if she had eaten any mushrooms or gotten into any antifreeze. We were unsure of both. His personality didn't change much after this event. He would become more confident, sometimes hitting you with his paw if you would take a break from petting him. Other times, if you were petting him from behind and paused to take a break, he would lift his head and stretch it towards you, letting his ears flop back to nearly touch the back of his neck. He started to sit by the dinner table and quietly beg for food. He had become more territorial within our gated yard, but he would still refrain from approaching people at our front door. There would be 2 groundhogs he'd dispatch from his yard, as well as be responsible for breaking a fence post when trying to bark at the mailman. To my mother's dismay, he also began a habit of guarding his yard at night. He would begin to wake her up at very late hours of the night, anywhere from 12 to 4 a.m. He won't go outside for anyone else in the house. If my mom is home, a reason to this day my mom doesn't want to get another dog. At times I would have the house to myself, and when this was the case, Romeo would have no other choice but to ask me to let him out to the bathroom. When he would ask my mom, he would either hit her with his hand, whine, or a combination of both. When he would beckon me, he would simply sit in my doorframe and look at me. If I didn't get the hint fast enough, or was too enthralled in my game, he may scratch the frame of my door. Eventually, I would then walk through my small house to the back door where I would let him out into the little fenced yard. Sometimes, to get a treat presumably, he would scratch on the door to be let in, only to run back into the darkness when I'd open the door. Sometimes I would feel paranoid and begin to believe he was trying to lure me outside for a reason other than to play. The reason I am writing this post is one encounter I had with him when I still lived at home. The internet is faceless, and the worst case is no one believes, but I figure sharing this in some way is better than keeping quiet. Maybe someone has had a similar occurrence. I sat there playing Destiny 2 in the middle of a raid with some friends, but I was home alone. He sat in my doorframe. I don't know how long he sat there before I turned to my left and saw him. At first I tried to ignore him. After all, I had multiple people depending on me in this game, and he could wait a minute. That was if he even needed something. Sometimes he would whine and complain to be let out, only to lead me to the door and then refuse to go outside. It was an extremely frustrating habit of his. I continued playing my game, and after a few minutes of him staring, he began to whine and scratch at the door. Usually when he started this, he would not stop until I got up. I arose from my chair and followed him as he turned and started walking towards the direction of my back door. I opened the door for him, and thankfully he started to walk outside. As he passed me, he looked up at me as if to blankly say thank you and proceeded to walk down the concrete stairs. I closed the door and returned to my game. It was maybe an hour that passed before I remembered I had let him out. As usual, my brain thought of the worst case scenario first. Did someone leave the gate open by accident and let him out of our yard into the neighborhood? I left my chair again and went to see what could have happened. What followed was a very brief encounter, which it's a reality I still question to this day. I stood in the outside doorframe. The cold air hit my face while I surveyed the yard for Romeo. I felt immediate defeat as he did not come to the door, and even more so when I did not hear his collar jingle at the sound of his favorite treat bag. My mind fell silent when I turned to my left and saw a faint light from under the door to my yard shed. Surely someone had left it on earlier, and maybe Romeo had snuck his way in. I had always felt my neighborhood to be safe, but in that instant I realized how there were no real security measures that would prevent some hypothetical crackhead from walking right into my shed and lighting up. How ridiculous. I pulled my big boy pants up and walked a short distance to the shed door. The rusty metal handle morphed with my fingers and palm as I pushed in. I never stepped up into the frame. What stood 8 feet away from me was Romeo, his body now upwards. A bipedal creature stared at me with the same expression Romeo did an hour ago, his knees bent back further than before, and tendons that previously would have prevented him from standing straight fell loose at the back of his legs. His spine still visibly curved his body forward, unbalanced. I made no noise, as did he. We stared for what felt like an eternity. He slowly approached me, and as he progressed, I expected his form to limp, but it did not. His gait contained a smooth certainty. I could describe it only in another human. Slight bits of drool fell from his black flaps. His eyes felt like encroaching black holes as he stepped towards me. His incapable paw reached out and softly contacted the shed door. He gently pushed it, closed. I stared back, still and quietly, at the flaking paint on the old wooden door. I would walk back inside, tell my friends I wasn't feeling well, and lie down. When I awoke the next day, I went to look for Romeo. What happened the night before I had convinced myself was a dream. Why would it be anything else? Romeo was still outside when I found him. I cautiously glared through the glass on my back door. He stared coldly up at me from the stairs. I spent the next few years of my life watching out for Romeo. He had never given me a reason to fear him. I no longer wondered if his eyes looked back at me with wonder. I moved out of my parents' house at 18. I don't believe anyone in my life would believe this. There is no reason for them to. Romeo never seemed to mean any harm. What would I gain from exposing him? He is still happily taken care of by my parents to this day. I joined a grief support group that turned out to be a cult. After my brother died, I didn't know who I was anymore. He was my only living family, my big brother, my protector, my closest friend. After we lost our mom when I was 12, and our dad bailed, it was always just the two of us. He raised me basically, cooked me dinner, walked me to school, taught me how to shave. The guy never asked for credit, never played the martyr. He just showed up, every day. Without him, I felt like a hollowed out version of myself, like it'd been cracked open and everything good had leaked out. I tried therapy, didn't click. Tried antidepressants. They numbed me to the point I couldn't even cry. Then one night I saw a flyer posted in the corner of the window at a coffee shop I used to go to with him. Black background, white serif font, simple. "We can bring back the dead, but we can help you feel close to them again. Grief Support Circle, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Wear red." It was weird. Red? Why? But I was raw, desperate, curious. The church basement where they met was maybe 2 neighborhoods over from where I live. Run down, clearly forgotten by time. I hesitated at the top of the stairs for a full minute before going in. The light came from candles, dozens of them. No electricity. The room smelled like melted wax and old wood and something earthy like dried leaves. About 20 people sat in a circle on folding chairs. All of them were wearing red in some form. Scarves, shawls, even a full red cloak on one woman with eyes like cloudy glass. I wore a red hoodie. No one batted an eye. The circle leader introduced herself as Marla. She looked like a librarian or a kindergarten teacher, graying hair tied back, calm voice, gentle eyes. She thanked me for being brave enough to come. Then she asked if I wanted to share. I didn't plan to speak, but something about the room, the silence, the stillness, the soft flickering light, the way everyone actually seemed to listen, it broke something loose in me. I started talking about my brother, our stupid inside jokes, how he used to let me stay up and watch horror movies with him when I was too young, how he smelled like peppermint and clean laundry, how he held my hand at our mom's funeral and whispered to me that I still had him, that I always would. I hadn't told anyone that before, not even my partner. I cried harder than I'd cried since the day I lost him. And after the tears dried, I felt lighter, not healed, not okay, but somehow less alone. The meeting ended with a chant. Everyone stood, held hands and hummed. Not a tune, exactly, but something low and vibrating. A single word repeated again and again. Volushta. No one explained what it meant. When it was over, I thanked Marla. She just touched my shoulder and said that I was seen tonight. It was strange. A little culty, sure, but it helped. So I went back the next week. The second meeting was smaller, only 10 of us this time, still candlelit, still wordless at first, still that hum of calm like being in the eye of a storm. A guy named Leo shared about his son who died in a car crash. He placed a small, tattered stuffed bear in the center of the circle. Marla nodded solemnly and said offerings help the departed find us. That's when I noticed them. Items scattered in the middle of the circle, old toys, wedding rings, worn-out sneakers, a lock of hair tied with string. At first glance, it just looked like junk. Then I realized every item belonged to someone dead. That week, I brought a photo of my brother, us at the beach when I was maybe 5. I left it in the circle without saying anything. No one questioned it. Marla just nodded. And that night, I dreamed of him. Not the usual hazy memory replay I'd been having. It was vivid. He sat on the edge of my bed, smiling at me. Eyes soft, hair messy. He said he was still here. I just needed to listen better. I woke up sobbing, but also grateful. I told myself that's what group therapy is like, right? You open up, you process, you start to heal. The rituals, the red clothes, the chanting. It was all just framing, symbolic. Nothing supernatural, just grief dressed up with structure. Right? It was my 5th meeting when the cracks started to show. We had a newcomer, a woman maybe in her 40s, looking completely shattered, makeup smeared, hands shaking, red scarf bunched around her neck like a noose. She sat down, whispered her name, Jessa, and said her daughter had died of sepsis, only 6 years old. She didn't cry, just stared at the floor like it might swallow her. When the circle ended, Jessa started gasping, shaking, panic attack. Marla calmly approached her, knelt, and placed a small Herkimer diamond on her chest. Instant silence. Jessa slumped in her chair, eyes closed, breathing deep. Everyone else seemed completely unfazed. I wanted to bolt, but I didn't, because I was still sleeping better. Still dreaming of my brother, still waking up to the sound of his voice whispering my name from deep inside my skull, and that didn't scare me. It comforted me. Until the 6th meeting. I brought my brother's hoodie with me that night. I'd been saving it. It still smelled like him. Faintly after all this time, I kept it in a sealed plastic bag at the back of my closet like it was a holy relic. I wasn't even sure why I brought it. Maybe I just wanted to see him more clearly in my dreams. Maybe I wanted him to talk to me again, like he had that first night. I left it in the center of the circle like everyone else did. Marla gave me that same calm, approving nod. The chanting that night was louder, longer. There was something different about it. The rhythm pulsed, like a heartbeat. Everyone's voices were deeper, not in pitch, but in weight, like they were singing from somewhere below ground. Then it happened. The air dropped 10 degrees in a blink. I could see my own fogged breath rise into the candlelight. The flames flickered, hissed, then died, one by one, as if something was walking through the center of the circle, snuffing out each one individually. Darkness swallowed the room. It was silent for a moment. No one moved. I heard someone quietly weeping. Then, footsteps. Slow, wet, uneven, like bare feet slapping on a stone floor. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The thing that entered the circle wasn't human. It felt like gravity bent slightly around it. The smell came first, like rotting meat mixed with burned rubber and bile. Then the voice. It wasn't spoken, it was inside my head. You said always. And suddenly I was 10 again, crouched behind the couch at our mom's funeral, whispering to my brother that I'd never leave him, that I'd always have me. That moment had been private, sacred. No one else was there, no one could known, but the voice repeated it, my voice, from then, over and over, like a recording dragged across broken glass. The candle sputtered back to life, and it was standing there, tall, wearing my brother's hoodie, but the thing inside it wasn't him. Its limbs were too long, its skin looked like wax pulled over bones. The hoodie hung wrong, stretched too tight across a chest that rose and fell in jerky, irregular bursts. Its mouth was open too wide, like rubber stretched to tearing. Its eyes, or what should have been eyes, were tiny black pits that oozed. Thick, greenish bile dripped from them onto the floor. It stepped forward. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was stare as it tilted its head toward me. Always, it whispered again in my voice. And that snapped something loose in me. I bolted. The others stood as one, their faces blank, their mouths moving silently. Their arms reached for me, but I was near the door. I shoved past them, hit the stairs, and didn't stop running until I was in my car with the engine screaming and the gas pedal slammed to the floor. I didn't look back. That was 5 nights ago. I haven't left my apartment since. I keep every light on. I've blocked the windows. I don't sleep more than an hour at a time. The first night, I told myself I imagined it, that it was a grief-induced hallucination. The second night, I found the hoodie folded neatly at the foot of my bed. It was still wet. It still reeked. The third night, I heard someone breathing just outside my front door. Soft, deliberate breaths, like they were waiting for me to open it. The fourth night, my phone played a voice memo I didn't record. It was me crying, whispering, "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." Except it wasn't from any moment I remember. And last night I woke up at 3:33 a.m. The lights were off, all of them. My phone was dead, my laptop was unplugged, even the glow from the router was gone. But candles were lit, dozens of them arranged in a circle, and in the middle of the room, right where my coffee table used to be, someone had written a word on the hardwood floor in a dark, wet smear. Return. I don't know if it was a message or a command, but I know this. Someone or something wants me back, and I think they're done waiting. I found a body in a backpack. When I was 16, I worked at a small gas station on a lonely street. I did it for a quick buck, only working 20 hours a week. It was easy and we were never busy, so most of the time I would sit at the counter and do schoolwork. The gas station was small, inside and out. 4 pumps sat in front, just right off the side of the road, and the building itself was smaller. There was a one-room bathroom, 1 middle row of snacks, 2 fridges, and then my little counter area. We had a back room, but it was used as storage instead of a break room. Behind the building was a large dumpster, but to access it, you had to walk out of the front door and around the building. Most people I saw were passing through, only stopping for gas, a pee break or a quick bite. The small town I lived in, Tattersall, wasn't a tourist town. The hot dogs that turned slowly on the burner were old, but I couldn't tell people that. My boss was a cheapskate and a money-hungry bastard, but he paid me, so I never complained. I let people buy chips that sat on the shelf for months, old hot dogs, and drinks that might as well have been a school science experiment. I always felt bad, and I was always a little nervous that I could get in trouble for selling the things. But my boss reassured me that everything would be fine, and nobody will ever know. One evening it was slower than normal. I had only seen 2 cars, and that was nearly an hour ago. Naturally, when a black Honda Civic pulled up, it caught my attention. Stepping out was a couple, maybe in their late 20s. The man opened the back door and grabbed a backpack while the women walked around and began to pump gas. I went back to my schoolwork, not thinking very much of it. If they needed help, they could always just come inside. The husband disappeared from view, but it was whatever. I went back to my pre-calculus homework, trying to figure out trigonometry. I fucking hated trigonometry. A few minutes later, the couple got back into the car and pulled away. I caught a glimpse of the man, who no longer had the backpack. Being more focused on my homework, I just assumed he had already thrown it in the back of the car again, and I just missed it. Later that evening, I was about to take out the trash. Hillary, an older woman with a severe cigarette issue, was supposed to take over for me. I offered to take out the trash, to which she agreed, and I walked around to the back of the building. A bad smell hit me in the face as I rounded the corner, but it was a large dumpster with God knows what, so it was bound to smell. Walking over, I threw the lid to the dumpster open and lugged the bag over my shoulder and into the green bin. When I shut the thing, something caught my eye. A backpack, the same backpack the man had earlier. It looked wet, as if you had spilled a water bottle into the bottom of the bag. It hunched over in an odd position. You could tell there was something in it. Being a 16-year-old guy, curiosity got the best of me, and I mistakenly opened the thing. Inside was what I could assume was a body. It was a deep red and pink in places. Or, I think it was. The black inner lining of the backpack made it hard to tell for certain. It stank, much worse than the dumpster nearby, and I could see chunks of meat and little white things sticking every which way. It looked like roadkill that had been hit by several cars. I turned around, vomiting the little bit I had in my stomach. Tears sprang to my eyes as it turned into acid coming up. Or I think it was acid. I know for certain I lost all my lunch. I stumbled back around the building, crashing into the wall and trying to wipe the vomit that was dribbling down my chin. I stumbled through the doors, catching Hillary's attention immediately. I choked out the words, something about a body, and felt the need to vomit again. She grabbed the phone, dialing 911, and speaking frantically. I shoved past her into the one bathroom we had, and stayed hunched over the toilet until the cops arrived. The rest of my evening and night was a blur. When the cops arrived, I was sitting on the nasty bathroom floor. I didn't care how gross it was. I couldn't bring myself to think of anything except what I had seen. I wanted so desperately to forget the horrid sight. A female officer came and found me, a shocked look appearing on her face as she saw my condition. "Hey there, you're Zach, right?" She sounded so soft, like a mother comforting their child after a nightmare. I could only nod in response. She sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulder and pulled me into a comforting hold. It felt like we sat there for hours, just the sounds of other officers and occasionally Hillary's voice piercing the silence. I don't remember exactly what happened. I was in and out of it through the rest of the night. My parents showed up. My mother frantically wrapped her arms around me. I gave my story to the officers. I couldn't talk to them without a guardian present. That's at least what my father explained to me later. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I can't forget it, the smell and the sight. I told a few friends a few weeks after it happened, but I kept the gory details out of the telling. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I saw. From what I have heard, the cops still don't know what happened. The body was unrecognizable. I'm honestly not sure how they even determined it was human, but I'm no forensic scientist. I never got any answers. Nothing about DNA or whatever they do. Nothing about the black Honda Civic. There was nothing. At least not that anyone told me. Eventually the case went cold and nobody knows what happened to the body in the backpack. The echoes in my apartment don't match the walls anymore. Alright, look. I don't know where else to put this. Posting online feels exposed, but I'm running out of options. And maybe, just maybe, someone here gets it. Or maybe I just need to get it out before I completely lose my grip. My name is Leo. 8 months ago, a drunk driver T-boned my car. I woke up in a hospital bed to silence and darkness, permanent damage to the optic nerves, total blindness. My wife, Clara, she was in the passenger seat. She didn't make it. They tell you recovery is a marathon. Learning to navigate the world again, relying on sound, touch, memory. I moved back into our apartment because familiarity was supposed to be my ally. My O&M instructor drilled it into me. Know your space. Every floorboard creak, the hum of the fridge, the gurgle of pipes in the wall, the 17 steps from bed to bathroom, the 12 from my armchair to the kitchen. These became my landmarks, my anchors in the dark. For months, it was just hard. Grief, frustration, learning curve from hell. But it was understandable hardship, predictable, almost. The apartment was my safe zone, the one place I felt I had some control. Then, about a month ago, that control started slipping. Not all at once, but in small, insidious ways that made me question my own senses, my own sanity. It started with sounds being wrong, not loud bangs or ghostly moans that would almost be easier to label as crazy. No, it was subtle. I'd be walking down the familiar hardwood hallway, expecting the usual click-clack of my cane or my shoes, and suddenly, for a step or two, it would be thud-thud, muffled, like walking on a thick rug. I'd stop, tap my foot, click-clack, normal, reach down, feel the floor, smooth, cool wood, no rug, nothing. Take another step, thud, panic would fizz in my chest. I'd stand stock still, straining my ears, trying to understand why the acoustic properties of my own hallway seemed to be changing mid-stride. Then the fridge hum, that constant low drone we all tune out. Mine started cutting out. I'd be in the living room, maybe listening to an audiobook, and realize the kitchen was dead silent. Not just quiet, but an oppressive, eardrum-pressing silence. My heart would pound as I walked the 12 steps to the kitchen. The moment I stepped over the threshold, or sometimes the instant my hand touched the cold metal, the hum would fade back in, soft at first, then normal. Like it had been holding its breath, waiting. Stress, right? Auditory hallucinations? Phantom sensations from a brain rewiring itself after trauma? I clung to those explanations. I wanted them to be true. But then came the cold spots. My apartment's old, drafty. I know where the drafts are. Under the front door, the leaky living room windowsill. But these were different. A sudden chill brushing my cheek in the middle of the hallway, far from any known source. A pocket of icy air lingering by my armchair for a second, like someone had just walked past. I'd spin around, useless. I know, but instinct. Listening intently. Nothing. Just the familiar apartment sounds. The distant city rumble. But the feeling of displaced air, of presence, lingered like a cold sweat. The worst part, the part that truly unravels me, is the spatial distortion. This is hard to explain if you can see. My world is built on a mental map. Sound echoes, textures, muscle memory. I know where things are. Or I did. Lately the map feels unreliable. I'll reach for the wall beside my bed, a wall I touch every single morning, and my hand travels further than it should. Just an inch, maybe two, but my stomach plummets. It feels like the wall receded. I tap it, solid plaster. But the distance felt wrong. Minutes later I might walk towards the kitchen doorway, counting my steps, anticipating the frame, and bam, I walk into it a step early. Like the apartment itself is subtly shrinking and expanding around me, playing tricks with perspective that I have no way to visually confirm or deny. The sounds escalated too. Misplaced became the norm. Making tea, I heard the click whoosh of the gas stove igniting, clear as day, but it sounded like it came from the bedroom closet. I froze, kettle heavy in my hand, turned my head towards the impossible sound. Silence. Turned back, hesitantly reached for the stove. Felt the heat radiating. It was on. The sound had just originated from the wrong place. The shower running, sounding like it's directly overhead in the living room ceiling. Each time investigation reveals normalcy, the sound snapping back to its rightful origin as I approach. It's like auditory gaslighting. You guys who can see, you hear a weird noise. You look, you scan, identify, rationalize. Cat knocked something over, wind rattled the blinds. Whatever, you verify. I can't. I hear the impossible, feel the impossible, and I'm left standing in the dark, my remaining senses feeding me contradictory, terrifying information about the one place I'm supposed to know best, my own damn home. I tried talking to my friend Sarah. She's great, really supportive, but she defaults to the logical stress, grief, PTSD. Maybe talk to your doctor, Leo. Check your meds. She means well, but how do you explain the feeling that the geometry of reality is fraying at the edges? That silence feels intentional. Then came the breathing. Last week, lying in bed, trying to will myself to sleep in the too quiet apartment, a sound started. Faint, slow, rhythmic, and close. Right beside my bed. Whoosh. Not my breath. I was holding mine, listening, blood like ice water, not the wind. It was deliberate, and it sounded dry, papery, like old leaves crushed in a hand. I couldn't stand it. I lashed out blindly where the sound was. My hand sliced through empty, cold air. The breathing stopped. Instantly, silence slammed back in, but the air my hand had passed through felt colder than the rest of the room. It wasn't just by the bed after that, cold spots on my neck while listening to headphones. Feeling like icy breath, I'd rip the buds out, heart hammering. Silence, just silence. And the whispers, faint, sibilant, seeming to come from inches away. Sometimes just formless sounds, other times, my name, Leo. Once while Sarah was visiting, making tea in the kitchen, I heard it right beside my armchair. Sarah, I called out, voice tight. No, honey, just putting the kettle on. She called back cheerfully from the kitchen. The whisper vanished. Imagined, or just waiting. Sarah, during that visit, gently brought up the anniversary of the accident. And Clara, I know this time of year must be hard, she had said, her hand briefly touching my arm. I flinched internally. I'm managing. I lied, pushing it down. This apartment stuff is just weird. But the seed was planted. Could this all be grief? A psychotic break? My mind fracturing under the weight of trauma and loss, manifesting as sensory chaos. The thought terrified me almost more than a haunting. If it's not the apartment, it's me. My own brain, my most crucial tool now, betraying me. I decided to try and capture something. Proof. I left my phone recording on my bedside table overnight, listening back the next morning, navigating the audio file with voiceover reading out the timestamps, was mostly hours of ambient noise, my own restless movements. Then, around 3 a.m., a patch of that deep pressing silence, and within it, barely audible, the faint, papery breathing. Whoosh. And just before it faded, a single distinct click, soft, sharp, like a fingernail tapping the phone's microphone. Something close enough to touch my phone while I slept. The days leading up to the anniversary were the worst. The spatial shifts became nauseating. Reaching for a doorknob and finding empty air, taking a step and slamming into furniture that felt like it had lunged into my path. The whispers grew bolder, sometimes seeming to echo Clara's specific turns of phrase, things only she'd say. The breathing felt constant, a background hum of dry decay. The anniversary itself arrived with a horrifying clarity. I woke up, not to chaos, but to a thick, waiting stillness. I sat in my armchair, the 12 steps to the kitchen feeling like miles, the 17 steps to the bedroom an impossible journey. And I let myself think about Clara, properly, the crash, the aftermath, the sounds. I remembered her complaining about the sticky fridge handle, how you had to jiggle it just so. Suddenly, the wrongness I'd felt wasn't a spatial shift, but a phantom tactile memory of that specific sticky resistance. I remembered her always being cold in that living room chair, wrapping herself in a specific worn blanket. The cold spots started feeling less like icy breath, and more like the lingering chill of her presence, an echo of her shiver. The muffled footsteps near the closet where she kept her soft slippers. And the breathing, that dry, papery sound. Oh God. The memory hit me, sharp and brutal, lying trapped in the wreckage, unable to see, hearing her beside me. Her breaths, shallow, ragged, fading. Ha, ha, he. Sound wasn't a monster. It was the sound of my wife dying, imprinted on my auditory memory, now projected onto the silence of my apartment by a mind drowning in trauma. The whisper of my name, the specific way she used to say it when she was worried. It wasn't a ghost haunting my apartment. I was haunting my apartment, haunted by grief so profound it was warping my perception, twisting sounds, textures, and spaces into manifestations of loss and trauma. My blindness wasn't just preventing me from seeing, it was forcing my brain to fill the void with the most painful data it had. This realization didn't bring peace. It brought a different kind of horror. The horror of knowing my own mind could construct such convincing, terrifying illusions, that the entity in the dark was me, or the part of me shattered by loss. I sat there in the armchair and finally broke, wept until I was empty, the sounds of my own sobbing loud in the heavy silence. It's been a few days since then. Things are quieter, but not fixed. The intense fear has subsided, replaced by a crushing weight of sadness. Sometimes I still feel a cold spot, but now I associate it with her hand on my arm, and the grief is sharp. Sometimes a sound seems misplaced, but it feels less like a trick and more like an echo, a glitch in the playback of memory, the breathing. I haven't heard it again, yet. I re-listen to the recording. The breathing is still there, faint, and the click. Listening now, knowing or thinking I know what the breathing is. The click sounds different, less like a fingernail, more metallic, like something from the crash, a piece of shifting metal, or is that just my traumatized mind layering more meaning onto meaningless noise? I've contacted a grief counselor who deals with trauma. I'm trying to navigate this, but the apartment doesn't feel entirely safe yet. The knowledge that my reality can be so profoundly altered by my internal state is unsettling on a fundamental level. Is it just grief? Or has the trauma, the grief, somehow thinned the walls, made the space around me susceptible to reflecting my internal state in ways that aren't entirely natural? I'm typing this now, voiceover reading my words back in its flat tone. The click of the keys sounds mostly right. Mostly. But sometimes, just for a second, the echo seems to come from the wrong place, from a little too far behind me. I don't know if I've solved anything, or just identified the monster as residing within. And maybe that's the real horror. Knowing the darkness isn't just around you, but inside you, capable of reshaping the world you perceive. I'm still here, in the dark, listening, and hoping the silence stays silent. That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.